Chapter 481. Wait. Tsing Hui, who was stunned by the scene in front of him, suddenly had a flash of inspiration. Sword principle. Why had his sword principle failed to gain the recognition of the previous sword spirits? But now, when he used the sword intent and mobilized the brilliant and domineering power of the sword intent, it burned the sword intent scene created by Greenleaf's sword intent to ashes. The main reason was the essence of the sword principle. The sword principle that the sword spirits in front of him needed was not the many sword techniques that he had mastered, nor was it the conventional sword intent that the cultivators of this world referred to, the sword principle that they needed. It was an extremely pure will, an extremely pure belief. Just like Greenleaf in front of him. His belief seemed to have nothing to do with the sword principle, but in the end, he was able to use this sword principle as a foundation to become a sword spirit. Previously, he had also used the torch dragon sword intent to fight against those sword spirits. Although he had defeated these sword spirits by relying on the strength of his sword intent, he could not obtain their recognition because the sword intent that had fused with the torch dragon divine soul was no longer pure in essence. It was just like how Tsing Hui had witnessed Sword Master Bai Heng's sword intent in the past, which had led to intense conflict and doubt about his own sword intent. Whether it was Sword Master Bai Heng or all the cultivators of the sword principle in this world, their sword intent all originated from the bloodlines of the divine beasts and sacred beasts that they had cultivated. Rather than saying that they had condensed their own will, it was more accurate to say that their thought process and mental state were more in line with the divine beasts that they had cultivated. Every time their sword intent broke through, they would become closer to the original form of the divine beasts. When they reached the fourth level of the saint realm, they would transform into divine beasts and sacred beasts. How could such a sword intent be called a true sword intent? How could such a sword principle be called a true sword principle? Although he did not have a true definition of the sword principle in his mind, after cultivating the sword for so many years, he was certain that this world's definition of the sword principle was wrong. Whether it was the many sword manuals that he had read during this period of time or the killing sword principle that had been passed down from ancient times, they were all just accessories of the bloodline cultivation system of the divine beasts and sacred beasts. Their true foundation was not the sword principle, but the divine beasts and sacred beasts. Just like Sword Master Bai Heng, if he asked her to give up her sword intent, it might affect her cultivation, but the effect was not great. However, if he asked her to give up the torch dragon bloodline that she had cultivated, she might even die on the spot. They didn't offer themselves to the sword Tao that they cultivated. Instead, they offered themselves to the bloodlines of divine beasts and saint beasts, which originated from the supreme Tao of this world. How could such a Tao of sword, such a Tao of sword, such a Tao of sword, such a Tao of sword that was born for the bloodline of godly beasts and holy beasts, be recognized by these sword spirits? How could it make 100 swords sing and 10,000 swords fly together? Is this the sword Tao that you really need, the one that you truly acknowledge? Is this the sword Tao that you've completely condensed and manifested by your own essence, qi, and spirit? Is this the sword Tao that you really need? Tsing Hui suddenly had an idea. At this moment, the torch dragon sword intent in his spiritual world suffered a serious impact. Since when had his sword intent changed from the sword intent of the Eastern Sun sword mantra to the sword intent that was born from comprehending the torch dragon spirit? Refining God Pavilion. In the Refining God Pavilion in the sky. From the divine refining pavilion in the sky, he began to comprehend the torch dragon sword intent that belonged to Master Zhuzhao in the condensing light sword. Since then, his sword intent had taken a detour and was getting further and further away from the true sword Tao. Moreover, from then on, all his energy, essence, and spirit no longer focused on the Eastern Sun sword mantra, nor did he try to break the limits of his essence, and spirit to condense a stronger sword intent. Instead, he put all his attention on the cultivation of his bloodlines. The Golden Crow bloodline and the Torch Dragon bloodline. Moreover, as he delved deeper into these two bloodlines, his comprehension of the Eastern Sun sword mantra also decreased. In the end, he completely abandoned this technique. Now that he thought about it, how long had it been since he recalled the Eastern Sun Sword Mantra, the sword mantra of the Eastern Sun Sword sect, in his mind? So, this is the sword intent that you want, Xing Hui muttered to himself. Immediately, his gaze fell on the torch dragon sword intent. Judging from Qin Ye's attitude just now, he was barely acknowledging his sword Dao. After all, the sword intent condensed from the Eastern Sun Sword Mantra was only at the beginner level and was far from the initial level. He estimated that if he really wanted to make 100 swords sing at the same time, his sword intent would have to be at the initial level or even the phenomenal level. Moreover, it was even at the phenomenal level with the Eastern Sun Sword Mantra as the foundation. However, if he really switched to cultivating sword intent, the torch dragon sword intent would definitely collapse, and by then, it would have a great impact on his cultivation. For a moment, Xing Hui couldn't help but fall silent. At this time, he had to make a choice. If he couldn't give up the torch dragon sword intent, he could forget about breaking through the myriad swords peak and making 100 swords sing at the same time. If he gave up the torch dragon sword intent, he was confident that he could cultivate the sword intent derived from the Eastern Sun Sword Mantra to the initial level in half a month with his foundation and comprehension over the years. As for the phenomenal level, God knew how much time it would take. If he couldn't cultivate the sword intent to the phenomenal level, he would probably only have a 30% chance of making 100 swords sing at the same time. The price he had to pay was that the torch dragon sword intent would collapse and even his torch dragon divine soul would be affected. The collapse of the torch dragon divine soul would definitely have an impact on his cultivation. Not to mention much, his combat strength would be reduced by at least a third. What he needed the most now was strength. Only with strength could he protect himself and obtain more Daoist rhymes. Was it worth it to kill the goose that laid the golden eggs if he lost a third of his combat strength for a mere 200 Dao runes? Let's see how far I can go first. Xing Hui muttered to himself. At the next moment, he had already walked up the mountain peak again. Not long after, he appeared in front of a spiritual sword. The sword intent emitted from this spiritual sword was stronger than the previous ones. Moreover, before activating the spirituality in this spiritual sword, Xing Hui already felt a biting cold aura, which was completely different from the refreshing aura of the green leaf. This sword spirit, Xing Hui stepped forward and his sword intent vibrated, quickly awakening the sword spirit. In reality, his senses were not wrong. The pressure that the sword spirit gave off when it manifested was much more powerful than the sword spirits from before. Just the pulses of sword intent it gave off had already caused the sword intent of the green ruins to repel him. If he did not use the torch dragon sword intent and just relied on the basic sword intent he had derived from the Eastern Yang sword scripture, he probably would have been defeated by the sword spirit before long. My name is Zhui Feng. Experiencer, wake me up from my slumber. Let me see what kind of sword principle you have comprehended. The sword spirit, Zhui Feng, appeared and didn't waste time talking nonsense with Xing Hui. With a low growl, the sword in his hand suddenly stabbed out like a stream of light. Zhui Feng. Compared to the green leaf sword, the heavenly fault sword, and the Tingxua sword, Zhui Feng's sword was filled with an oppressive aura. The sword intent contained in the edge of the sword was like an unsheathed divine weapon, carrying a sharpness that could penetrate the soul as it slashed towards Xing Hui's spiritual world. Before the sword arrived, the sword intent arrived first. The sword intent that Xing Hui cultivated from the Eastern Sun Sword Mantra couldn't resist for more than half a breath before it collapsed. The divine weapon in Zhui Feng's hand whistled through the air. The three elements in the sword were perfectly combined, and through this sword, it could produce 3 times the power. Even though Xing Hui reacted quickly and dodged quickly, he was still injured by Zhui Feng's sword light. The biting cold edge tore through his neck, leaving behind a trail of dark red blood. Too weak. You're no match for me just by relying on sword principle. Zhui Feng had already probed Xing Hui's bottom line with one sword strike. He immediately withdrew his sword, as if about to return to the spiritual sword. Wait! The battle isn't over yet. Xing Hui shouted loudly. At the same time, he stretched out his hand and wiped off the blood on his neck. In just a few moments, the wound caused by Zhui Feng had already begun to scab. This was the terrifying characteristic of a 10th order recovery ability. Flesh wounds like this could be easily healed. It's only a matter of time. Zhui Feng saw that Xing Hui wasn't going to give up and wanted to continue the battle. He immediately twisted his body, and the biting cold sword light once again filled his spiritual world. Even though he immediately shouted and released the sword intent from the Eastern Sun sword mantra in an attempt to resist Zhui Feng's sword intent, he was instantly defeated by Zhui Feng's sword intent. The moment his sword intent was defeated, his spirit was shaken, which naturally led to a series of stagnant qi and blood. Even though he tried his best to block Zhui Feng's sword, he was still powerless. He could only do his best to minimize the damage this sword brought to him. Qi. Blood splattered. Another sword wound appeared on Xing Hui's shoulder. If he hadn't dodged in time, this sword strike would have cut off his entire arm and shoulder. Too weak. Your sword principle has never been refined into a whole. Sword intent is sword intent, qi and blood are qi and blood, and true qi is true qi. There's no connection between the three. Is this your sword principle? If this can be called sword principle, then I, Zhui Feng, am already standing at the peak of sword principle, a supreme master who has reached the peak. Zhui Feng stabbed out with his sword and shook his head. However, facing such a nagging sword spirit, Xing Hui wasn't angry. Instead, his eyes flashed. Sword intent is sword intent, qi and blood are qi and blood, and true qi is true qi. They've never been refined into a whole. In other words, true sword principle requires the three to be one. Xing Hui thought. He was someone who had raised his comprehension to the 5th level, so his mind worked very quickly. Soon, he had thought of something. When Zhui Feng's 3rd sword strike came at him again, he had already let out a roar. His qi and blood surged, and his true qi and spirit surged. At the same time, his spirit surged. Suddenly, the power of the originally ordinary sword intent rose sharply. Although it still couldn't block the power of Zhui Feng's sword intent, it bought him precious time, so that Zhui Feng's next sword strike only brushed past his body and didn't cause any serious damage. Is this all you can do after using all your strength? Your sword principle doesn't even have the qualifications to be a beginner. Sword principle is like crossing the sea. Sword intent is like a person, and sword qi is like a sail. As a ship, no matter how skilled the sailor is at sailing, if the ship's hull isn't solid and the sail isn't strong enough, how can it travel in the sea and reach the other side of the highest realm? As soon as Zhui Feng finished speaking, a new sword light formed. Chapter 482. Ship. Sails. Man. Xing Hui's level 5 comprehension lit up with countless sparks of inspiration when he heard Zhufeng's words. He was extremely talented in sword cultivation. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to enter the Eastern Sun Sword Sect and master the Eastern Sun Sword Codex in just a few years. He also comprehended sword intent and was revered as a sword sage in the world of martial artists. Xing Hui had not continued to study the Eastern Sun sword scripture during this period of time, and his cultivation of sword intent had embarked on the path of comprehending the torch dragon sword intent in the condensed light sword. However, his accumulated experience had allowed him to gain an extremely deep understanding of the way of the sword. Now that he had been stimulated by Zhu Feng, the sword intent in his mental world began to circulate spontaneously. As the Eastern Sun sword intent gradually grew stronger, the torch dragon sword intent was immediately impacted and shaken, gradually collapsing. The way of the sword is like crossing the sea. The sword intent is like a person, and the sword qi is like a sail. As a ship, no matter how great a person's sailing skills are, without a sail, they will not be able to continue. With an empty ship, without a person to control it, without a sail to power it, it will still be unable to move. It's the same with an empty ship. Only when all three of these aspects reach the peak and work together wholeheartedly can one travel the sea smoothly and reach the other shore of the supreme realm. Tsing Hui's mind was filled with inspiration. His voice was like a great bell, constantly reverberating in his mental world, causing it to rumble endlessly like an earthquake. At the core of his spiritual world, the shadow that belonged to the torch dragon sword intent was peeling off and collapsing layer by layer under the continuous vibration of the great bell. It was like a peerless divine weapon that was covered in rust, and under the vibration of the vast divine sound, all the rust was shaken off, thus revealing its true sharpness. The edge of a supreme sword. Buzz. Buzz. When the sword condensed in the spiritual world, the vital energy and blood within Qing Su's body were guided by the new sword intent involuntarily, fusing with the sword intent. At the same time, when all of his true essence was sealed up, the sword qi guided the vital energy and blood in his body involuntarily. It began to refine essence into qi, creating a new type of true qi that used the sword intent as a foundation. Generally speaking, before, he had visualized the golden crow and the torch dragon to condense qi, but now, he was condensing the supreme sword intent to condense qi. There seemed to be no difference, but in reality, however, the situation between the two had already changed silently. By visualizing the golden crow and the torch dragon, the cultivator's ultimate growth path was to transform into the golden crow and the torch dragon. The ultimate path of their cultivation was to transform into the real golden crow and the torch dragon. In other words, no matter how powerful they could never surpass the real golden crow and the torch dragon. Even if they returned to their ancestors with the bloodline of the golden crow and the torch dragon, they still could not break through the shackles of the final bloodline. But at this moment, what guided his path of cultivation was no longer his bloodline, but the green ruins itself. It was the strand of sword intent he possessed, and this strand of sword intent originated from a cultivator's own will and worldview. No one knew where the ultimate achievement of this strand of sword intent lay, the way of the sword. Just as Zhu Feng was about to continue attacking and defeat Tsing Hui, he seemed to sense the change in Tsing Hui's aura. He suddenly stopped in his tracks, somewhat stunned. He stared blankly at Tsing Hui, as if he had sensed something familiar from his body. Under the stimulation of this familiar feeling, he seemed to have thought of something. For a moment, he fell into a trance, staring at Tsing Hui in a daze, not saying anything for a long time. The sword intent in Tsing Hui's mental world continued to vibrate for an entire day. Fortunately, because he was already halfway up the myriad sword's peak, no one could see his figure clearly if they did not fly on their swords. They did not know what he was doing on the mountain. They only felt that he was unwilling to give up and was still experiencing failure again and again. No one disturbed him along the way. When Tsing Hui's mental vibrations gradually stabilized, his gaze once again focused on the sword intent in his mental world that had completely merged with his own essence, qi, and spirit. Great success! Great success of sword intent! Even though it had not reached the peak of great success of the torch dragon sword intent, which was only half a step away from perfection, but this sword intent, it was completely condensed from his own essence, qi, and spirit, representing all the essence he had cultivated so far in the Dongyang sword manual. Even if the strength of the sword intent could not be compared to back then, when Tsing Hui commanded it, there was a feeling of blood and essence qi connected. Such a sword intent might be inferior to the torch dragon sword intent at the peak of great success in terms of strength, but if the two were suppressed to the essential qi, spirit refining realm, or even the unity of spirit and qi, Tsing Hui could completely rely on the perfect combination of this sword qi and his essence qi to crush the torch dragon sword intent with an absolute advantage. No. It was not just crushing, it was fighting across realms. The Dongyang sword intent at the peak of the essential qi realm could defeat the torch dragon sword intent at the peak of great success in the spirit refining realm. Unbelievable. This is the true sword intent. A sword intent that completely belongs to me. My will is my Tao. This is my sword Tao. Tsing Hui clenched his fist. Under the vibration of the sword intent, he felt that all the swordsmanship he had cultivated could be twice or even several times more powerful at this moment. For a moment, Tsing Hui seemed to have thought of something, and his gaze immediately fell on the torch dragon's sword intent. At that time, he felt something in his heart and fell into a strange state of enlightenment. All his attention was focused on the transformation of the Dongyang sword intent, and he did not notice the collapse of the torch dragon sword intent at all. So when his sword intent rushed to the peak of great success, the torch dragon sword intent had completely collapsed under the impact of his Dongyang sword intent. And the direct impact of the collapse of the torch dragon sword intent, the torch dragon divine soul dimmed, it even dimmed to the point that it had a tendency to collapse. Tsing Hui estimated that if he could not find a way to solve the collapse of the torch dragon sword intent in a few months, his torch dragon divine soul would completely dissipate. At that time, the torch dragon divine body that he had cultivated with great difficulty would also be annihilated and return to nothingness. Not only the torch dragon divine body, because his sword intent had already changed from the previous excavation of the golden crow and torch dragon bloodlines to the cultivation of his own sword intent by gathering his own essence, chi, and spirit. If he wanted to cultivate the golden crow bloodline to a higher realm in the future, he had to change the characteristics of his sword intent. From a sword intent that completely belonged to him to a sword intent that was close to the will of the golden crow divine beast. Otherwise, his golden crow bloodline cultivation would be severed. This kind of consequence made Tsing Hui's heart sink. The sword Tao required sincerity and purity, and this kind of exclusivity was too strong. Only I am supreme. Tsing Hui closed his eyes, and a trace of pain appeared on his face. This was a choice that was enough to torture people to collapse. When he stepped into this world, in order to pursue power, he had already abandoned his passion for the sword Tao, but now, suddenly, he'd gained sudden comprehension in the sword Tao and attained mastery in sword insight, and it had awakened his heart in the sword Tao once more. However, it just so happened that he had no choice but to face this cruel choice once more. Dream, was he still going to lose to reality? He had already lost once, did he need to lose a second time? Or perhaps, since he had already lost once, then the second failure didn't seem so intolerable anymore. And if he still succumbed to failure the second time, then the third, fourth, fifth, and even the countless times after that, would it still be far away? A trace of confusion flashed across Tsing Hui's painful expression. He couldn't see the path, couldn't see the future clearly, a brand new sword Tao, but I feel that this sword Tao is full of uncertainty. It seems to be a flash in the pan, and can be extinguished at any time, drowned in the dust of history. Just as Tsing Hui was tormented by this choice, a voice sounded. It was Zhu Feng. The sword spirit, Zhu Feng. Tsing Hui looked at the sword spirit in front of him. This strange existence that had existed for an unknown number of years also felt confused. Do you feel the same way? Confused, Zhu Feng lowered its head. Perhaps. Many times, I do feel very confused. Just like right now, I don't know what the meaning of my existence is. Why am I staying here? Why do I have to draw my sword again and again when the trial takers come, even if some of them are weak and clumsy to the point of making me want to laugh? When it said this, Zhu Feng's face revealed, a smile that didn't really look like a smile, because it had not smiled for too long. Because it had been too long since its kind could make it talk properly. Day after day, the cycle repeats itself. Zhu Feng stretched out its hand and grabbed at the void, as if it wanted to grab something. Was it the traces of time? Unfortunately, there was nothing left in its hand. Tsing Hui fell silent. Thousands of years of confusion, compared to Zhu Feng, the torment and choice he was facing now seemed to be nothing. I'm very curious. If your willpower wasn't affected by this confusion, then how sharp would your sword intent, your sword edge, be affected? How could it be affected? Zhu Feng looked strangely at Xing Hui, and then, he waved his hand in the air. It was not affected in the slightest. His sword intent was as sharp as ever. It was like a peerless divine weapon that had been hidden in its scabbard for dozens of years. Once it was unsheathed, even gods and ghosts would flee. Even though Xing Hui had already cultivated the sword intent derived from the Eastern Sun Sword Codex to great success, the essence of that sword intent still gave him a soul-stirring feeling. Your sword intent, I was very confused, and there were countless doubts in my heart. But, are these important? When I really need to draw my sword, I only need to put all my mind into my sword, use my sword, and wave it forward. I will use all my strength to display my sword intent. Whatever confusion, whatever doubts, at that moment, all of them will leave me. Only a carefree feeling exists in my mind. So, at that time, I only need to wave my sword. Wave my sword. I only need to wave my sword. Xing Hui could not help but think of the night when he had just comprehended sword intent in the Eastern Sun Sword sect. Yes, everything else was not important. He only needed to immerse all his mind into the sword in his hand, and then, follow the original intention in his heart, and wave his sword. Xing Hui closed his eyes, and the experience of that night in the Eastern Sun Sword sect seemed to replay in his mind. Wave my sword. Wave my sword. Wave my sword. He enjoyed the joy of coming into contact with new sword techniques every day, enjoyed the joy of training until his entire body ached, enjoyed the carefree feeling of thrusting out sword after sword, and completely immersed his mind into the sword in his hand. Wave my sword, 10 swords, 100 swords, 300 swords, 1,000 swords, the traces of time gradually faded away from his body. All the distracting thoughts in his mind returned to the void. Wave my sword, and in front of him, watching him wave his sword again and again, Zhu Feng also seemed to be immersed in the trajectory of his sword, and his eyes once again became confused. No, this was not confusion. It was a kind of intoxication. What was intoxicated was not the sword intent that was triggered when he waved his sword, nor was it the sword technique that he displayed, it was a kind of spirit. A kind of spirit that was pure to the extreme. That kind of spirit was resplendent and dazzling, like a perfect and flawless gem, emitting a gaze that made any sword spirit unable to shift their eyes away. 3,000 swords, 10,000 swords, 30,000 swords, 100,000 swords. Gradually, Qin Yi, who had previously acknowledged Xing Hui, suddenly appeared. It just stood beside Zhu Feng, looking at Xing Hui, watching him wave his sword, looking at the extremely pure spirit on his body, as if it was looking at a rare treasure. Not long after, Tian Ke appeared, and not long after, Teng Shua also appeared. More and more sword spirits sensed this mysterious rhythm, and without needing Xing Hui to awaken them one by one, the sword spirits began to appear spontaneously, gathering beside Xing Hui. Looking at Xing Hui's sword techniques that did not have any moves to speak of, they were mesmerized. Buzz buzz. A sword spirit was stirred, and the body of the sword let out a crisp sword hum. The sword hum sounded, as if it had broken some kind of shackle, and more spirit swords began to vibrate, and many of the sword spirits present softly let out long cries. 100 swords sang together. Chapter 483. It's been 3 days and he still hasn't come down. Since he doesn't have the ability to gain the recognition of those sword spirits, he might as well go down the mountain and waste our time. That's right, that's right. Sword cultivation isn't like ordinary cultivation methods. It requires one's own sword intent to be highly compatible with the will of the mythical beasts and sacred beasts that one has comprehended. The process can't be described with words. How can ordinary cultivation methods compare to it? Our hidden sword sect has spent hundreds and thousands of years, but there haven't been many sword experts who could gain the recognition of many sword spirits at the same time, let alone an outsider. He really won't give up until he sees the coffin. He's clearly been rejected by several sword spirits, but he's still unwilling to give up and shamelessly stays on the myriad swords peak. Does he think that a miracle will happen? At the foot of the Myriad Swords Peak, the patience of the people who had been waiting for 3 days was getting worse and worse, especially when they saw that Xing Hui was unwilling to come down for a long time. The matter hadn't come to a conclusion yet, so their words were naturally filled with mockery and ridicule. It was as if their voices could reach the Myriad Swords Peak and disturb Xing Hui's performance, break his will, and make him give up on the Myriad Swords Peak. These people, why are they all like this? There was a trace of anger in Su Zhao's eyes. Humph, by belittling Mr. Yuqing, they're showing their position and determination, hoping to curry favor with the North Moon Peak and Aurora Peak. They're just clowns. Su Tong glanced at the cultivators who were talking endlessly and coldly snorted. Before the result is out, we shouldn't give up hope. Su Xiao looked at the Myriad Swords Peak. At this time, Xing Hui had already disappeared into the undulating terrain of the Myriad Swords Peak, but there was still a trace of hope in her heart. Although she knew that the probability of her hope being realized was pitifully low, but, at the moment when the truth was not revealed, she was unwilling to give up. As if the heavens had heard Su Zhao's call, on the originally calm Myriad Swords Peak, streaks of spiritual light whizzed and shot in the same direction. At the same time, the sounds of swords began to reverberate on the Myriad Swords Peak. In just a moment, the sounds of swords chanting had become more and more frequent. Eventually, they connected into the clouds and resounded in the Myriad Swords Peak for a long time. The sudden change caused the impatient crowd to freeze on the spot. They could not help but widen their eyes and stare at the Myriad Swords Peak. 100 swords chant. 100 swords chant. This is the scene of 100 swords singing together. Oh my God, the rumors are true. There's actually someone who can get the approval of over 100 spiritual swords, thus producing the phenomenon of 100 swords chanting at the same time. Yuqing. Is it the mysterious expert invited by the Divine Grace Merchant Guild? He did it, he did it. He actually did it. 100 swords chant at the same time. Oh my God, I can actually see the magnificent sight of 100 swords singing at the same time. After being stunned for a moment, a burst of uncontrollable exclamations broke out from the crowd. Everyone was shouting at the spectacular scene in front of them. As for those cultivators who had mocked and ridiculed Xing Hui earlier, they were all ashamed and hid in the crowd, not daring to show their faces. Even though they were all looking at the spectacular scene of hundreds of swords chanting at the same time on Myriad Swords Peak, they were all extremely shocked. He succeeded. Su Xiao looked at the changes on Myriad Swords Peak and was stunned for a moment. Even though she had been fantasizing about this scene for a month, when the scene of 100 swords chanting at the same time really appeared in front of her, she still could not believe it. The scene in front of her was like a dream, it was so unreal. Mr. Yuqing, he actually, not only Su Xiao, but Su Tong also widened her eyes at the scene in front of her. However, Xing Lian, Si Tongjian, Elder Jin Yin, and the rest could not help but cheer at this moment. That's great, he succeeded. Mr. Yuqing succeeded. 100 swords chant at the same time, he did it, he did it. How is it possible? Compared to the shocked cheers of the crowd and the Divine Grace Merchant Guild, who were overjoyed at the birth of a peerless sword genius, the experts from the North Moon Peak, Aurora Peak, and even the Hidden Sword Peak were all shocked at the same time. They stared at Myriad Swords Peak with eyes full of disbelief. 100 swords chant at the same time. It's really the 100 swords chant at the same time. That Yuqing, he actually caused the 100 swords chant at the same time. How can he do something that the Hidden Sword sect has not been able to do for hundreds of years? Damn it, we're in big trouble now. 100 swords chant at the same time. Will it alarm the Hidden Sword Venerable? It's actually the 100 swords chant at the same time. The rumors that have been passed down from the Myriad Swords Peak are actually true. This is bad. Yuqing was invited by the Divine Grace Merchant Guild. Now that the 100 swords chant at the same time has alarmed the Hidden Sword Venerable, he only needs to tell the hidden sword venerable about this and we will definitely be punished by him. Amidst the shock, the people on the North Moon Peak, Aurora Peak, and Hidden Sword Peak were already in a mess. Among them, the North Moon Peak's Peak Master Mu Shengyi, Great Elder Bei Shentong, and the rest had a cold glint in their eyes. While the 100 Swords chant at the same time is still short and the Hidden Sword Venerable hasn't been alarmed, let's strike right now and kill Yu Qing like a bolt of lightning. No matter how outstanding a sword genius he is, as long as we can kill him, I believe the Hidden Sword Venerable won't completely fall out with our North Moon Peak or the heavenly ways behind the North Moon Peak for a dead sword genius. Bei Shentong made up his mind immediately. He turned to North Moon Xian and said, I'll heavily injure Yu Qing in a while, and you'll kill the final assassin. You have the Scarlet Mystery Tao Lord behind you, so no matter how furious the Hidden Sword Venerable is, he'll never be bold enough to kill you. All right. North Moon Xian glanced at Su Xiao from the Divine Grace Merchant Guild. His eyes were cold as he agreed without any hesitation at all. Do it. Bei Shentong called out. His presence was about to erupt as well. However, the moment he released his aura, in the forbidden grounds of the Hidden Sword sect that was over 100 kilometers away, another aura that was vast, ancient, profound, and majestic suddenly rose up. In an instant, it shot straight into the clouds, stirring up the wind and clouds, causing the clouds above the mountain to be torn apart in one fell swoop, forming a huge whirlpool that was over 60 kilometers in diameter. Once the terrifying aura appeared, it immediately brought with it a vast and suffocating pressure. It rolled over and directly descended above the Myriad Swords Peak. It was a terrifying pressure that enveloped everything within 100 kilometers. It was so powerful that no one had the courage to attack. It instantly made Bei Shentong, the great elder of the North Moon Peak, who had already activated his Hunyuan and was about to attack, feel cold all over. His eyes widened in shock as he stared in the direction of the aura. His eyes were filled with uncontrollable shock and fear. It's the Hidden Sword Venerable. It's the Hidden Sword Venerable. Mu Xingyi trembled all over as his voice trembled. He had already been scared out of his wits. The Hidden Sword Venerable. He's actually still alive. Everyone's guess was wrong. The Lord of the Aurora Peak, Lu Xiangyang, paled slightly. Even the Golden Core elders of the Hidden Sword Peak's main branch all became solemn. When they thought of what they had done in the Hidden Sword sect during this period of time, they immediately had a bad feeling. The Hidden Sword Venerable. The Hidden Sword Venerable. This is the presence of the Hidden Sword Venerable. That's great. I knew Master Hidden Sword Venerable would be fine. The Hidden Sword Venerable has emerged. Hidden Sword Venerable sensed the 100 Swords chant and came out of seclusion. That's great. Hasn't there always been a rumor that the great Hidden Sword Venerable has died of old age in seclusion? Look, who still dares to say that the Hidden Sword Venerable has died of old age? Hiss. What a terrifying aura. 100 years ago, I personally sensed the presence of the Hidden Sword Venerable. At that time, his aura shouldn't have been so strong, right? But now, the Hidden Sword Venerable has only revealed his presence, but the pressure that it brings is so strong that I can't even think of resisting it. Could it be that, the Hidden Sword Venerable's cultivation has broken through again? Compared to the North Moon Peak, Aurora Peak, and even the Hidden Sword Peak who were so shocked that they kept quiet out of fear, the other cultivators of the Hidden Sword sect erupted into uncontrollable cheers at the same time. The Hidden Sword Venerable, Aunt Tong, did you feel it? Such a powerful presence, it's definitely the Hidden Sword Venerable's Grandmaster. Grandmaster is fine, he's fine. In the direction of the Shenhui Chamber of Commerce, Su Xiao couldn't help but jump up and down in joy when the Hidden Sword Venerable's presence appeared. She was no longer as calm as before as she pulled Su Tong and jumped up and down in joy. Xing Lian, Si Tongjian, Jin Yin, and even Su Tong were filled with surprise and joy. Even though they had already predicted that Mr. Yuqing's hymn of 100 swords would definitely draw out the hidden sword venerable, they still could not help but want to cry out loudly to vent their joy when they personally sensed the hidden sword venerable's presence. The hidden sword venerable, Bei Shintong's shocked gaze paused in the hidden sword venerable's direction for a while. As if he thought of something, his gaze suddenly landed on North Moon Xian. His gaze seemed to contain a sliver of uncontrollable shock. When North Moon Xian sensed Bei Shintong's questioning gaze, he sucked in a deep breath and nodded firmly. His expression was extremely ugly. The aura that the hidden sword venerable has demonstrated this time, is indeed no weaker than my master's. It's true. With North Moon Xian's confirmation, Bei Shintong was mildly surprised. Afterwards, he was like a punctured balloon, immediately withering away. A large chunk of his vital energies seemed to have been sucked away. He, Bei Shintong, was the greatest expert in the hidden sword sect, second only to the hidden sword venerable. If it were not for the fact that the heavens had sworn the hidden sword venerable was dead and were willing to give him the resources to complete a high-grade golden core and even let the sect master of the Scarlet Mystery sect take in their most outstanding junior, North Moon Xian, as a disciple, why would he betray the hidden sword venerable and betray the interests of the hidden sword sect to side with the heavens? But now, not only was the hidden sword venerable still alive, but his cultivation had broken through again, becoming even more powerful than before. And, in the past few years, he had caused countless losses to the hidden sword sect. Chapter 484. Tsing Hui's state of epiphany lasted for 10 days. Due to the suppression of hidden sword venerable's aura, his 10 days of cultivation could be said to be peaceful. He could freely express the suppression and understanding of sword Tao that he had suppressed over the years. When he woke up from the mysterious state of epiphany, his sword Tao naturally broke through to the perfect level. When the conditions were right, success would follow naturally. It was easy. Walking on the bloodline cultivation path, his talent was twice the work for half the result. He relied on the chaotic level and various Taoist rhymes to comprehend sword Tao, however, it allowed him to get twice the result with half the effort. It was as if the game that was originally in hell mode had suddenly changed to easy mode. The rapid growth made him somewhat stunned. As Tsing Hui woke up from his epiphany, the spirituality of the many sword spirits on Myriad Swords Peak gradually dissipated. After a while, they returned to their respective spiritual swords and fell into silence again. The difference was that their spirituality was stronger than before. Experiencer. A voice echoed in Tsing Hui's ears. It was the sword spirit, Zhu Feng. Tsing Hui's gaze fell on the sword spirit. You've received our approval. After Zhu Feng finished speaking, he bowed slightly to Tsing Hui. Can you tell me your name? My name is Tsing Hui. Tsing Hui. There was a sliver of satisfaction in Zhu Feng's eyes. I will remember that in the journey of my life that I don't have many memories of. A swordsman called Qing Su gave me a rare experience of sword intent. It's my honor. Zhu Feng nodded. In the next moment, its spirituality dissipated. It had turned into a stream of light and entered the spiritual sword. Tsing Hui's gaze paused on Zhu Feng for a moment. He raised his head slightly and looked in a direction that was hundreds of kilometers away. There, he could feel a strong and suffocating aura. This aura was so strong that even the remnant sword of the Almighty's true body could not be compared to it, let alone the Black Heaven Taoist master that he encountered back then. Little friend, would you like to take a trip to my burial sword peak? As Tsing Hui looked in the direction of the aura seemed to have sensed that Tsing Hui had completed his epiphany. Its voice suddenly rang out in the void. My pleasure. Tsing Hui nodded and flew up on his sword, heading straight in the direction of the aura. As for the fact that the torch dragon's soul was on the verge of collapse due to the breakthrough of his sword intent, he couldn't care too much about it for the time being. He's out, he's out. Mr. Yuqing is out. Tsing Hui flew out of the Myriad Swords Peak on his sword. Many cultivators who were still guarding the foot of the mountain suddenly exclaimed in surprise. This direction. Mr. Yuqing is heading towards the burial sword peak where the hidden sword venerable is in seclusion. He was indeed summoned by the hidden sword venerable. Divine Grace Merchant Guild Su Shao couldn't help but ask excitedly, will he tell hidden sword venerable about the unfair treatment our Divine Grace Merchant Guild received? He will, he definitely will, Su Tong said firmly. Su Tong said with conviction. In the end, she glanced in the direction of the North Moon Peak. Can't you see that everyone at the North Moon Peak is in a state of panic right now? They've been trying to make up for their mistakes in the past 10 days. North Moon Peak. Su Shao glanced in the direction of the North Moon Peak. In the past 10 days, many people from the North Moon Peak had left. Most of them were trying to think of a way to deal with the hidden sword venerable's reprimand. There were even some people who secretly found her, the president of the Divine Grace Merchant Guild, and expressed that the North Moon Peak was willing to apologize for what they had done to the Divine Grace Merchant Guild during this period of time. They hoped that the Divine Grace Merchant Guild could forgive the North Moon Peak. For the North Moon Peak to beg the Divine Grace Merchant Guild in such a humble manner was something that had never happened before during this period of time. They won't be happy for long. Tsing Hui's mind was no longer on the internal affairs of the Hidden Sword sect. He did not find it strange that the Hidden Sword Venerable was still alive. After all, even if an Almighty had lived for almost 3,000 years, he would have taken many heavenly treasures to extend his life. It was not surprising that he was still alive. At this moment, what he really wanted to know the most was the 10,000 Swords Peak. What secrets did the 10,000 Swords Peak hold? And the many sword spirits on the 10,000 Swords Peak, why did they exist? These questions could only be answered after meeting Hidden Sword Venerable and asking Hidden Sword Venerable in person. To Tsing Hui, 100 kilometers was easily traversed in less than half an hour. As he pressed down on the sword light, he directly landed on the mountain where the Hidden Sword Venerable lived. When he landed on the mountain, he discovered that the entire mountain was sealed by a tyrannical and cold sword intent. Although this sword intent was completely different from the sword intent that Tsing Hui had comprehended this time, it was born from visualizing the white tiger. However, the killing power contained within was enough to kill any Golden Core stage expert who easily stepped into it. It was precisely because of the protection of this formation that even though the sect master of the Hidden Sword sect and the elders of the Golden Core stage wanted to know if the Hidden Sword Venerable was safe and sound, they still did not dare to step onto the burial sword peak to investigate. However, at this moment, the sword formation on the mountain had already left a path. As Tsing Hui followed this path and landed on the burial sword peak, the sword formation once again sealed off the burial sword peak. In a courtyard of the Hidden Sword Peak, an old man who looked rather old and was filled with an ancient and decaying aura was looking at him with a smile on his face. When I sensed the aura on your body, I guessed that you shouldn't be that old. That kind of vitality can't be faked. However, when I saw you in person, I discovered that you're actually even younger than I imagined. You're truly a heaven-sent genius. The old man looked at Tsing Hui and praised him from the bottom of his heart. Tsing Hui did not need any introduction to recognize the old man in front of him. He immediately stepped forward and bowed slightly, greetings to the Hidden Sword Venerable. No need for formalities, please take a seat. The Hidden Sword Venerable gestured with his hand and invited Tsing Hui into a small pavilion in the courtyard. Tsing Hui also sized up the Hidden Sword Venerable with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He could sense that the sword intent that the Hidden Sword Venerable emitted faintly formed a strong pressure on him. This pressure did not only come from the nature of his sword intent, but also from his mental strength level. With the combination of these two factors, even Tsing Hui's perfect sword intent was inferior to his. However, what really surprised him was the energy ripples on the Hidden Sword Venerable's body. That energy ripple, it was not even comparable to the Golden Core stage incarnation of the Black Heaven Taoist Master, let alone the broken sword of a newly ascended Almighty. This was not in line with the terrifying aura that the Hidden Sword Venerable had unleashed earlier. Was the aura not proportional to his strength? Or, Was he unable to see through it because his cultivation was too low? Young friend, you can see through it. The hidden sword venerable noticed that Xing Hui's expression was strange and answered rather casually. Sword venerable, you. The hidden sword venerable nodded slightly, you're right. I'm indeed not in the divine realm. Why? Xing Hui frowned. The hidden sword venerable was already a powerful figure 1,000 years ago. Even if he did not make any progress in the past 1,000 years, his cultivation should not have regressed and become a golden core cultivator. It's very simple. I've recultivated. The hidden sword venerable said calmly as if he was talking about something unimportant. However, the information in his words made Xing Hui's heart skip a beat. He immediately thought of the problem that his torch dragon divine body and golden crow divine body were facing. Sword venerable. You're saying that you've given up your divine realm cultivation and switched to the sword Dao? Divine realm, the hidden sword venerable shook his head. I've already broken through to the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth 100 years ago. Lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. The hidden sword venerable nodded slightly. After that, I came into contact with the essence of the sword Dao by chance. 60 years ago, I made up my mind to abandon my cultivation and switch to the sword Dao. Phew! Xing Hui heaved a long sigh of relief when he heard the news. A great figure at the peak of the Saint Realm was equivalent to the strongest Dao Lord in the Heaven Dao, yet he was actually willing to abandon his cultivation at the peak of perfection to cultivate in the sword Dao. Such determination, Xing Hui was filled with respect. At this moment, he also vaguely understood why the hidden sword venerable had not died, but why he still watched the Grand Supreme, Aurora Peak, and North Moon Peak, which were supported by the heavenly axiom, abuse their power in his hidden sword sect. It was because, after giving up his divine realm cultivation, he no longer had that kind of power. Rather than that, he might as well hide behind the scenes and intimidate the North Moon Peak and the Aurora Peak. At the very least, the North Moon Peak and the Aurora Peak would not dare to cross the line. Don't look at me like I'm a martyr. The hidden sword venerable smiled when he saw the change in Xing Hui's expression. Actually, things aren't as bad as you think. Xing Hui thought about the powerful sword essence that the hidden sword venerable released earlier. Moreover, he did not think that the hidden sword venerable was someone who would act rashly without considering the consequences. He said in a deep voice, I'd like to hear the details. Even though I abandoned my divine ability and chose to cultivate in the sword Dao, but, the outcome isn't as bad as you imagine. If I'm fast, in 1 or 2 years, and if I'm slow, in 8 or 10 years, my sword Dao will return to its peak in a completely new state and blossom with boundless brilliance. As the hidden sword venerable said that, his gaze landed on Qing Su. Originally, I didn't plan on showing myself so early. After all, I only have a few years left before I reach major achievement in the way of the sword. However, the hymn of 100 swords. I really don't want to see a genius of the way of the sword like you end up like me, walking down the wrong path again and wasting your youth for nothing. As a result, I came out of seclusion early and summoned you. I hope that I won't be the only one walking down the path of the way of the sword in the future. Xing Hui was suddenly enlightened. He bowed deeply to the hidden sword venerable and said, Hidden sword venerable, please enlighten me. Of course, this is why I called you here. The venerable of the hidden sword looked at Qing Su and spoke with a sliver of irrepressible excitement. He was like a traveler who had traveled through the desert alone for several decades. He did not know day or night, direction, or the future. After being tormented by this loneliness for decades, he suddenly saw a creature like himself, and could not wait to tell it about all his experiences over the years. The sword way that truly existed in the ancient times is not the one we imagined. It has a completely different form, and the power it possesses is far beyond our imagination. Even though I have only seen a small step forward, I believe that if I can really demonstrate this small step of the sword way that I saw, the light that will bloom will definitely amaze the entire infinite wasteland domain. Chapter 485. The way of the sword from the ancient times. Tsing Hui's way of the killing sword was said to have originated from the ancient times. The ancient times that I'm talking about are much older than the ancient times that you know of. It was a time so long ago that there were no records of it. At that time, heaven and earth were in harmony, yin and yang were in harmony, trees were everywhere, palaces were connected, celestial birds were flying, and there was an ancient creature called the Celestial. It was immortal and could travel with the wind, gathering to discuss the Tao. This time should be traced back to before the divine wilderness. Before the divine wilderness, from what Tsing Hui knew, the ancient divine wilderness was destroyed by many powerful people 10,000 years ago. It was shattered into a boundless land with Hunyuan as the center. There were many islands like Eastern Wilderness, Chongzhen, and Hidden Sword. They were just one of the many islands that were destroyed in the divine wilderness. As for the information before the divine wilderness was destroyed, he had not heard of it. After all, even if there were sects that survived the destruction of the divine wilderness, there would be very little information left behind after the catastrophe. Before the divine wilderness, even the ancient times that belonged to the divine wilderness, Hidden Sword Venerable's eyes flashed and he was happy with his discovery. According to the information that I've gathered and the conversations with the sword spirits on the myriad sword peak, I've come up with a new way of the sword. It's a way of the sword that is not inferior to the way of the bloodline. After he finished speaking, Hidden Sword Venerable waved his hand and a sword aura formed in his hand. In just a moment, it turned into a peerless divine sword. As soon as the sword appeared, Ching Su immediately felt life-threatening danger. Just a glance at the sword was enough to make his heart palpitate. The destructive power within the sword had completely exceeded the limits of the power he had been aiming for all these years, especially, on this divine sword, he saw the shadow of a black tiger. It was as if it was carved on the divine sword. It was very lifelike, as if it was alive. This sword, this is my destiny divine sword. It's called the Hidden Edge Sword. It's level 12. Level 12. Tsing Hui thought of the condensing light sword. Can a level 12 divine sword be this powerful? A 12th grade divine sword naturally can't have this kind of power, but the vault sheath in my hand can't be measured by a 12th grade divine sword at all. It's the vessel of my divine ability and battle constitution. The carrier of my divine powers and battle body. That's right. Hidden Sword Saint smiled and said, all this time, we have been cultivating the sword Tao because of the bloodline of godly beasts and saint beasts. Even the sword Tao that was passed down from the godly desolate era still revolves around godly beasts and saint beasts. No matter how powerful they are just supplements for the bloodline of godly beasts and saint beasts. Through the constant contact with the sword spirits on the 10,000 Swords Peak and the ancient knowledge that I have learned, I have found a new cultivation direction for us sword Tao cultivators 100 years ago. It is a cultivation direction that is more suitable for me and for those who seek the sword Tao. If this cultivation direction is correct, our cultivation will no longer be limited by the bloodline of godly beasts and saint beasts. Even those who cultivate the bloodline of godly beasts and saint beasts can break their own limits and reach the highest level. Tsing Hui seemed to have thought of something. His eyes fell on the black tiger engraving on Hidden Edge Sword and a bolt of lightning flashed in his heart. Hidden Sword Venerable, the bloodline that you have awakened, you're right. The Black Tiger Bloodline. The Black Tiger Bloodline. Hidden Sword Venerable admitted in a self-deprecating manner. Spiritual beasts. Although spirit beasts could grow to the peak of the saint realm, they had to be the best among spirit beasts, or a close relative of a saint beast who had a part of the bloodline of a saint beast. Generally, the upper limit of a spirit beast's growth was often the golden core realm, especially when they were close to the bloodline shackles. The resources that a spirit beast bloodline cultivator needed to spend were several times that of a saint beast or even a divine beast bloodline cultivator. Hidden Sword Venerable was able to use the bloodline of the spiritual beasts to reach the almighty realm. Later on, he even reached the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. What kind of talent, and perseverance did he have? Unfortunately, it was precisely because of the existence of the bloodline shackles that the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth had become a nightmare that he could never break through. He would be trapped in the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth for the rest of his life, and he could forget about having any extravagant hope of breaking through. Xing Hui guessed that, this might be the reason why he was willing to devote all his attention to the way of the sword. He was looking for another way out. His way out was not to pursue the way of the sword, but power. This was the reason why Hidden Sword Venerable was not able to trigger the Hymn of 100 Swords back then. I've sealed my soul, my flesh, and my abilities into my natal sword, the Hidden Edge Sword. I've also refined the Hidden Edge Sword into my body. Hidden Sword Venerable looked at the Hidden Edge Sword in his hand. The aura on the Hidden Edge Sword was tumbling and the power it contained was earth-shattering. Once it was unleashed, it would not be inferior to the divine powers of the Almighty. If he really merged his natal sword with his divine powers, then the power of this divine sword would be able to kill a divine being. Divine soul, body, divine powers. Is this a sacrifice to the sword? Xing Hui was silent. Sacrifice to the sword? This is not a sacrifice to the sword, but a protection to the sword. We cultivators cultivate the way of the sword. Just the passion for the sword is not enough. We also need a powerful force to protect us in the process of cultivating and comprehending the way of the sword. This method of refining the divine soul, body, and divine powers into the sword is the protection method I created. Protection method? That's right. What is the core of the natal sword? This divine sword is connected to your own sword intent, and the sword intent is the fusion of your spirit and your beliefs. It is the core of your way of the sword. Unfortunately, the core of the way of the sword doesn't have a powerful protective force. The sword chi and sword techniques derived from it are far from comparable to the divine beast battle bodies and the various divine abilities. You pursue the way of the sword, but you don't have a protective force. You can only watch as the geniuses who have dedicated their lives to the way of the sword are crushed into dust by the battle bodies. This kind of way of the sword, in my opinion, is incomplete. So, I combined what I have learned and created this protective method for us sword cultivators. Fusing the battle bodies, the divine soul, and the power of divine abilities into the natal divine sword. Once the natal divine sword is forged. When the natal sword venerable finished speaking, an unprecedentedly powerful aura rose from his body. I can kill saints. Xing Hui looked at the natal sword venerable in Hidden Sword Venerable's hand that had not completely transformed. Kill saints, this was not an empty promise. However, when a cultivator's divine powers, and divine powers are all fused into the natal sword venerable. Without the protection of divine powers and divine powers, the cultivator will be extremely weak. Even you, Hidden Sword Venerable, can't withstand the attack of a golden core cultivator. How are you going to protect yourself? Protect myself? Hidden Sword Venerable said arrogantly, why do you need to protect yourself? He looked at Xing Hui and asked, do you know what a real swordsman's strongest defense is? Xing Hui was silent for a moment. Then, he looked up and said, attack. That's right. Attack. Hidden Sword Venerable raised his hand and slashed forward as if he was going to cut the void in front of him in half. A real swordsman's strongest defense is his attack. 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 Attack again. Attack like fire and attack like thunder. Why should we defend when the enemy attacks us with divine powers? We just need to attack. Attack. Attack again. Shatter all of the enemy's attacks. Techniques. Divine powers. Battle body. Divine weapons. Rare treasures. I have a sword that can break all attacks. Ha ha ha, this is our defense. This is the strongest defense of a swordsman. Attack is the best defense. Xing Hui immediately understood Hidden Sword Venerable's thoughts. By fusing divine powers, and divine powers into the natal sword venerable, he might be so weak that a golden core cultivator could kill him, a phenomenon of heaven and earth cultivator. However, as long as his attack was strong enough, as long as his attack was fast enough, any attack of his enemy would be destroyed by his sword before it could hit him. How could all the techniques, constitutions, weapons, and treasures in the world hurt him at all? This was the sword Tao that Hidden Sword Venerable had learned. This was why Hidden Sword Venerable dared to claim that he could kill a divine being. Of course, killing a saint was one thing, and killing a saint was another. He might be able to tear apart a saint's domain with a single strike of his sword, but he might not be able to shatter it with a single strike. As long as that saint pulled back and avoided his attack, the power of the domain would sweep over him, and he, who was weak and fragile, would be reduced to ashes. Ultimate Tao, Tsing Hui murmured to himself. Sword Tao is the ultimate Tao. Hidden Sword Venerable continued Tsing Hui's words and said, abandoning defense, abandoning all transformations, and even sacrificing one's own life to turn everything one has into an attack. This is the Sword Tao that I understand. I call it the ultimate Sword Tao. At this point, his tone was slightly low, but his voice contained a vast power that shook one's heart. Perhaps in this way, we won't be able to create protective talismans, we won't be able to transform our vital energy into bodies, we won't be able to transform endlessly, and we won't be able to live forever. But, at least, we'll be able to forge a sword, an indestructible sword, a sword that can break through anything, a sword that is invincible, a sword that will be able to stun everything in the world as long as it's unsheathed. Ultimate Sword. Tsing Hui's right hand, which he always used to hold his sword, trembled slightly. He felt that something in his heart was gradually awakening. Ultimate Sword. Hidden Sword Venerable nodded heavily. The core of this cultivation method is whether the natal legendary sword can carry the power of the divine being, the battle body, and the divine being. The natal legendary sword is the combination of the divine being and the sword intent. Is your sword intent strong enough to suppress the various powers in the natal legendary sword and make it willingly protect you? My sword will is incomplete, and the Tao of divine ability has been deeply rooted in my mind for thousands of years. Thus, I spent 60 years, but I was unable to completely suppress the Tao of divine ability, the Tao of divine ability, and the Tao of divine ability that had fused into the hidden edge sword and fused them into my natal sword. However, you are different. You have only cultivated for a short period of time, and your mind has yet to form that supreme bloodline and spiritual consciousness. Furthermore, your sword will is so powerful that it can cause 100 swords to hum at the same time. Thus, you are the best successor to my Tao of sword. Chapter 486. Successor. Tsing Hui raised his head and looked at Hidden Sword Venerable. The Hidden Sword Venerable looked at Qing Su at this moment. There was a sliver of gratification from making friends with the same kind in his eyes, as well as a sliver of anticipation for his future. My current accomplishments are already the limit. I'm too old, and I've been affected too deeply by my supreme bloodline. If I make a breakthrough as I strengthen my sword and reach sainthood, I can't guarantee that my sword intent will still be able to suppress my abilities, body, and soul after I understand how powerful sainthood experts are. I can't guarantee that my sword intent will still be able to suppress my abilities, body, and soul after I understand how powerful sainthood experts are. I can't guarantee that I'll give up on the way of the sword and cultivate my bloodline again. However, you're different. You're very young, very young. Youth means unparalleled malleability. In particular, your sword intent gives you a unique advantage when it comes to refining your bloodline and abilities. As a result, as long as you persist, you'll be able to surpass me one day and truly stand at the peak of the world, announcing to the world that I'm the supreme way of the sword. If that day comes, I, Hidden Sword Venerable, will die with no regrets. Giving up all means in exchange for an extremely powerful attack. The ultimate sword. Tsing Hui's mind was filled with thoughts. The ultimate sword's advantage was obvious. A life-bound sword born from a transcendent realm cultivation was already enough to make him invincible in the saint realm in terms of offense. If the energy within the life-bound sword reached the level of lawful embodiment of heaven and earth, it could even slay saints. No. Tsing Hui's foundation was stronger than hidden sword venerables. If he used a divine ability or even a supreme divine ability to nurture his sword, the pure power of his attack would be even stronger. He would be able to threaten saints the moment his divine ability was formed. If he used a supreme divine ability to nurture his sword, it would be possible for it to have the power to kill gods. But the disadvantages were also obvious. There were no transformations, no additional techniques, and their defenses were so weak that they could be threatened by cultivators in the Golden Core realm or below. Once they were hit by the divine ability of a transcendent realm expert, they would die if they were hit, and be injured if they were touched. But, these disadvantages were not unavoidable. Immortal body, backtracking, this was a unique advantage that he had gained by borrowing the power of the Chaos Temple. Even Hidden Sword Venerable was no match for him. Therefore, compared to Hidden Sword Venerable, he was more suitable for the ultimate sword principle. Besides, Tsing Hui thought of the way of the sword and the way of the bloodline. Between the two, he clearly preferred the former. If the way of the sword was his life's dream, then previously, it was because the dream had to be built on the foundation of reality. Without the economic foundation to survive, how could he give up everything to pursue his dream? And now, the ultimate sword Dao was equivalent to giving him a sufficient financial foundation to pursue his dreams. If he still chose to put down the sword in his hand under such circumstances, how can I cultivate Hidden Sword Venerable's ultimate sword Dao? Tsing Hui said solemnly. If you want to learn, I'll teach you. Hidden Sword Venerable said with a smile. Qing Su took 3 steps back before standing before the Hidden Sword Venerable. He bowed towards the Hidden Sword Venerable seriously. Please teach me, Hidden Sword Venerable. All right. There were no conditions, and there was no hesitation. Hidden Sword Venerable agreed without hesitation. In the next moment, his eyes lit up. A powerful sword essence that contained endless information shot out from his spiritual world and rushed into Tsing Hui's spiritual world. Then, it exploded in Tsing Hui's spiritual world. It carried with it a vast amount of information and countless mysteries that bloomed in his spiritual world. Tsing Hui did not hesitate when he received the information. He immediately closed his eyes and focused on comprehending the sword essence. Hidden Sword Venerable was comforted when he saw that Lin Huang had absolute trust in him. However, what Hidden Sword Venerable did not know was that Tsing Hui did not guard against him. Instead, it was that, he was still in the backtrack skill and was not afraid of death. It took Tsing Hui an entire day to digest the information that Hidden Sword Venerable had given him. Not only did the information include the conversion method for the ultimate way of the sword, but it also included the various experiences the Hidden Sword Venerable had gone through in the past 60 years. The Hidden Sword Venerable had passed everything to Qing Su without holding anything back. These experiences were invaluable to him. They would allow him to take a lot of detours. After digesting the information, Tsing Hui opened his eyes again and bowed to Hidden Sword Venerable. Thank you, Hidden Sword Venerable. It's a pity that I'm old. This is the end of my life. I don't think I'll be able to live for long if I convert to the ultimate sword Dao. Otherwise, I'd be able to teach you more things in the future. 100 Swords Chant. This is the first time we've seen such a genius in the sword Dao since the Hidden Sword sect was founded. I really want to know what kind of achievements such a genius in the sword Dao will have. I'm sure Hidden Sword Venerable will be able to see it. Thank you for your kind words. Hidden Sword Venerable said as he looked at Tsing Hui, because you've comprehended the pure sword essence, your original sword essence has collapsed, right? In order to not affect the divine beast bloodline that you cultivate, you should quickly choose your natal divine sword and refine all of this power into your natal divine sword. Natal holy sword, Tsing Hui nodded. In the cultivation of extreme sword Tao, sword intent was the most important, but the natal divine swords used to carry the gold crow divine body, torch dragon divine body, gold crow divine soul, and torch dragon divine soul were equally important. If the natal divine swords were not strong enough to carry enough power, he would have to spend a lot of energy to refine them, so as to prevent them from limiting the power of the gold crow and torch dragon bloodlines. I have a variety of materials I prepared when I changed my cultivation all those years ago, and it includes some materials to refine swords. You can take them if you need them. Besides that, you ought to understand that when you fuse the bloodline of a divine beast into your origin sword, the more peaceful the bloodline of the divine beast is, the easier it is to fuse it, and vice versa. Amongst the various stages of cultivation in the Saint realm, the Golden Core realm is the most peaceful. In this realm, the power of the Golden Core realm is as harmonious as one and is prepared for the creation of divine powers. If you can refine your natal holy sword as a Golden Core realm cultivator, it will be much easier for you. Golden Core realm, Xing Hui shook his head when he heard this. Too many resources are needed to form a Golden Core. Even an inferior grade Golden Core requires a lot of resources, especially since I have a divine grade battle body and divine grade vital essence. Once I form a Golden Core, it will be a superior grade Golden Core. Correspondingly, I will need a lot of resources to form an inferior grade or superior grade Golden Core. Resources. Hidden Sword Venerable said with a faint smile. The Hidden Sword sect has ruled the Hidden Sword continent for thousands of years. Over the years, we have accumulated a lot of resources. In addition, 100 years ago, I planned to use my second Golden Core to carry my natal holy sword, so I deliberately collected resources to refine my Golden Core. Unfortunately, I later found out that the method to carry my natal holy sword with my second Golden Core was not usable, so I collected all these resources. Although these resources are not much, they are enough for you to form a superior grade Golden Core. Xing Hui was slightly stunned by Hidden Sword Venerable's words. The Hidden Sword sect was the supreme overlord of the Hidden Sword continent. The entire Hidden Sword continent was dominated by the Hidden Sword sect. As the strongest member of the Hidden Sword sect, if the Hidden Sword Venerable wanted to collect resources, the power that he could use was far beyond what ordinary people could compare to. Although it was difficult to accumulate resources for hundreds of years to condense a high-grade Golden Core, it was still barely possible. However, Xing Hui had inherited Hidden Sword Venerable's ultimate sword art. If he took these resources, he would not be able to accept them. Hidden Sword Venerable seemed to understand Xing Hui's thoughts. He pondered for a while and said, "These resources were gathered by the Hidden Sword sect after hundreds of years of hard work. If I just gave them to you, even as the founder of the Hidden Sword sect, I would feel sorry for the disciples of the Hidden Sword sect. How about this? I hope that you can become the supreme elder of the Hidden Sword sect. When you have enough power, you will be able to protect the Hidden Sword sect. Also, in the next 100 years, you will need to take in a disciple and teach him." As the supreme elder of the Hidden Sword sect, Xing Hui looked at Hidden Sword Venerable and said, "I don't think I will be staying in the Hidden Sword sect for long in the future." "I understand. I just hope that when the Hidden Sword sect is in trouble and asks you for help, you will help the Hidden Sword sect." "I promise." Xing Hui agreed. At the same time, he was confused. "Hidden Sword Venerable, you are about to switch to the way of the sword. When that time comes, you will be strong enough to dominate the Saint realm. With your power, you will be able to protect the Hidden Sword sect." "Why?" Hidden Sword Venerable shook his head. "If I can cultivate my natal spiritual sword in 3 to 5 years and fuse it with my cultivation, I will be able to improve greatly." "But," the Hidden Sword Venerable's voice turned gloomy. "I'm too old. I'm 2,800 years old now. I've been through countless battles in my life. If I still had my Golden Core, I would have been able to survive for another 100 or 200 years. But now, I've already infused all of my cultivation into my natal divine sword. The only reason I'm still alive is because of the medicine I took earlier. But this won't last for too long. 40 years, 30 years, 20 years. I don't know. I have to leave a way out for the Hidden Sword sect. At the same time, I have to settle some grudges. Tsing Hui looked at Hidden Sword Venerable. It was the first time he saw a cultivator facing the fate of dying of old age. At that moment, he did not know how to answer. Life and death is a constant. I have lived for so many years, I have seen through it. The Hidden Sword Venerable looked at Qing Su and smiled faintly. Your sword intent is very pure. If you want to maintain this purity, you need to have a clear mind. As a result, I'm not afraid of you going back on your word. Otherwise, your promise today will become a demon in your future, a shackle that will stop you from attaining great achievement in the way of the sword. To be honest, I'm lucky to have met a cultivator with pure sword intent like you in my limited time left. It'll truly allow me to pass on my way of the sword and the Hidden Sword sect without worry. Qing Su met the Hidden Sword Venerable's gentle gaze. Even though he knew what the Hidden Sword Venerable was scheming, he did not resent him at all. Instead, he promised seriously, don't worry, Hidden Sword Venerable. Unless I die, I'll definitely do everything I can to assist the Hidden Sword Venerable the moment I receive news that you're in trouble. I trust you. Hidden Sword Venerable nodded solemnly. Most of the time, when one understood the other party's sword will and knew what kind of person they were, one would be able to trust them unconditionally. For a swordsman, it was that simple. Come with me. I hope that the resources I have accumulated will be enough for you to form your golden core. Chapter 487. Under the guidance of Hidden Sword Venerable, Tsing Hui soon arrived at a loft. There was also an array around the loft, but it was mainly used as a warning. As Tsing Hui stepped into the loft, all kinds of rare and precious resources appeared in front of him. Tsing Hui looked at them one by one and was dazzled. Although the value of each of these resources was not too high, there were so many of them that it was shocking. With so many resources, it would be easy to condense 2 or 3 superior-grade golden cores, let alone one. If he was willing to combine all of these resources and sell them together, he would be able to exchange for 4 digits of Dao aura value. This would definitely be the largest amount of wealth he had encountered since he came to this world. There are so many of them, Tsing Hui was deeply surprised. After a few hundred years, you should have some assets. Hidden Sword Venerable said with a smile. Qing Su glanced through the resources one by one. He had no use for some of them, but close to half of them were useful to him. Close to half was enough for him to condense a high-grade golden core. As for the remaining half, it would be easy for him to use them. All he needed to do was make a trip to the Heavenly Desolate region and use the channels of the 6 great merchant associations to change them. With these resources and the 2 divine beast bloodlines in Tsing Hui's body, he had a bold idea in his mind. Burial Sword Peak is barely safe. With the array outside protecting it, not to mention Golden Core Realm cultivators, even powerful figures who have cultivated divine powers will die if they rush in recklessly. You don't have to worry about danger if you cultivate in seclusion here. You can ask me if there is anything you don't understand during this period. Hidden Sword Venerable said. Then I will nag Hidden Sword Venerable, but, Tsing Hui thought of the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce and wanted to tell Hidden Sword Venerable. However, he considered that Hidden Sword Venerable was only strong in appearance. Although he had a powerful sword will that was not inferior to the peak of the Saint Realm, his divine powers and body had not merged with his natal divine sword. Even if he told Hidden Sword Venerable about the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce, he would not be able to handle it. If he showed up rashly and showed his weakness, it would cause endless trouble. After all, when the Hidden Sword Venerable swept through the Hidden Sword continent, he had offended many experts. It would not be too late to deal with the North Moon Peak and the Aurora Peak after he reached the Golden Core Realm, or after the Hidden Sword Venerable's cultivation and the natal divine sword were completely fused into one. With the sword intent of the hidden sword venerable not long ago, the North Moon Peak and the Aurora Peak would not dare to act rashly. Alright, I'll start condensing my golden core and begin forging my natal divine sword. Yes. Hidden sword venerable nodded. What materials are you lacking? I've collected some, see if they can be of any use to you. Also, I have dozens of high-level sword forging recipes, you can take them for reference. As he spoke, Tsing Hui waved his hand, and dozens of sword forging materials that were at least level 10 appeared in front of him. I really do need a sword forging recipe. Take a look at it yourself. Hidden Sword Venerable laughed and took out a jade talisman. All the sword forging recipes I've collected over the years are here, from level 9 to level 10 to level 15. I've spent a lot of effort on sword forging and am a master of sword forging. Unfortunately, it's better for you to forge your own natal divine sword. It's not suitable for others to forge it. Therefore, when the time comes, you'll have to rely on yourself. Do you have the divine blessing technique? If you don't, you can use an item that carries Tao with 100 Taoist rhymes to point it out. I do. Tsing Hui nodded. Is Hidden Sword Venerable a master of sword forging? Back then, due to various reasons, I squandered all of my chaos level on the advancement technique. Now that I think about it, if I could have maxed out my comprehension in Sword Dao talent, I would have long comprehended the ultimate Sword Dao. I wouldn't have to wait until I'm at the end of my rope. You maxed out the advancement technique? Hidden Sword Venerable nodded. There's no harm in telling you this. I'm currently at the 29th level of Chaos, with the advancement technique taking up the 10th level, the divine protection technique taking up the 5th level, and the personal space, perception, recovery, divine technique, and even luck, resurrection, and transformation technique taking up the 14th level of Chaos. As a result, my 29th level of Chaos doesn't provide any significant boost to my cultivation, and my perception is only at the 4th level. As for the 30th level of Chaos, the consumption of 365 Taoist rhymes per year has already exceeded my limit. Although the Hidden Sword continent produces around 200 Taoist rhymes per year, it's still not enough to support the 30th level of Chaos. Thus, the 29th level is already my limit, and there's no hope for my perception and Sword Dao to reach the 10th level. Tsing Hui nodded. In fact, this was the downside of not having a master to guide him. Without a proper plan for the chaotic level, the allocation of points would naturally be extremely chaotic. Often, they would choose to upgrade a certain ability whenever they needed it. This was a very common phenomenon among the Sons of Chaos. After all, apart from those who had a powerful backer and background, who could guarantee that they would be able to upgrade their Son of Chaos? Who could guarantee that they wouldn't be affected halfway through their cultivation path? It's best that you arrange your chaotic level properly. If your comprehension and sword principle talent increase, your path to the ultimate sword principle will definitely be smoother. I understand. Tsing Hui responded. He was currently at the 47th chaotic level. If he guessed correctly, the chaotic treasure pavilion would definitely transform once he reached the 60th chaotic level. At that time, only the heavens knew how much Taoist rhymes he would consume every day. As a result, he could only increase his chaotic level to the 12th chaotic level. He had to make good use of these 12 chaotic levels. He couldn't squander or waste them at all. At the very least, as he switched to sword principle, one of his comprehension and sword principle talent would have to be upgraded to level 10. Sword Sovereign, I'm a little curious. What will happen if the advancement technique is upgraded to level 10? You can't underestimate any special ability when it reaches the 10th level, and the advancement technique is no exception. Before the 4th level, the advancement technique can only upgrade weapons within the 4th level by 1 level. When it reaches the 5th level, this restriction increases by 1 level. That is to say, at the 5th level, you can upgrade weapons up to the 6th level, and the 6th level advancement technique can upgrade weapons up to the 7th level, and so on. When it reaches the 10th level, Not only can it upgrade weapons up to the 11th level, it also has a special effect, which is to disregard the rules and upgrade weapons by one level on the basis of the original weapons. Sword Sovereign Hidden Sword smiled at this point. Although the cooldown for the level 10 advancement technique is as long as a year, and any weapon can only be upgraded once, you should be able to imagine how powerful it is. On the basis of the original divine weapons grade, ignoring the rules. Raise it by 1 grade. Tsing Hui's heart trembled. This special effect was unbelievably powerful. At this moment, Tsing Hui finally understood why Sword Sovereign Hidden Sword was able to collect so many cultivation resources. It should be known that if a young master of a first-rate faction wanted to condense a superior golden core, it would take the faction hundreds or even thousands of years to do so. Even though Sword Sovereign Hidden Sword was located in the Hidden Sword continent, and his income was not inferior to any first-rate faction, it did not make sense that Sword Sovereign Hidden Sword was able to condense a few superior golden cores. However, now that Sword Sovereign Hidden Sword was talking about the level 10 advancement technique, Tsing Hui could understand why. At the same time, he also understood why the weapons in the hands of the cultivators of the major factions were usually 1 or 2 levels higher than the cultivators themselves. He originally thought that it was because of the destruction of the divine wilderness, but now it seemed that, the advancement technique and divine protection technique were the main reasons. Alright, you don't have to think too much about the advancement technique. Other than those families that specialize in forging, who would be willing to spend so much effort on the advancement technique? After all, the advancement technique is a secret technique that was derived from the level 5 Chaos Realm. If one deliberately cultivated it, they would only be able to achieve this after reaching level 14. Tsing Hui nodded. Take a look at these sword forging recipes and choose a sword that you want to forge. If there are any materials that you lack, I can see if I can find a way for you. Alright. Tsing Hui responded and began to search through the recipes. This is, after a while, Tsing Hui's attention was attracted by a level 14 divine weapon. Dragon Abyss Sword. Looking at the Dragon Abyss Sword, he suddenly thought of something. Sword Sovereign. Is this Dragon Abyss Sword the legendary 7-star demon refining sword of the Hidden Sword sect? When the Hidden Sword Venerable heard the Green Ruins mention the Dragon Abyss Sword, he could not help but be slightly taken aback. After a while, he laughed. I've heard of the rumors of the 7-star demon culling sword, but I've stayed in the Hidden Sword sect for over 1,000 years, and yet I've never even seen the shadow of this ancient divine sword. Oh, it's not that I've never seen it before. At the very least, the sword manual in your hands was an accidental discovery, and it's the only thing that has anything to do with the 7-star demon culling sword. However, if the 7-star demon culling sword really is some sort of extraordinary ancient divine sword, then its level wouldn't just be a mere level 14. You have to know that during the Divine Wilderness era, there were powerful beings at the peak of the Saint Realm who could create a world with a single thought. Hearing this, Tsing Hui nodded slightly. But looking at the recipe of the Dragon Abyss Sword in his hands, he felt that this recipe was not simple. After looking at it for a while, the recipe of the Dragon Abyss Sword mentioned that the core of the sword was an item that contained sword intent. This made him make a decision. When the time comes, I will try to forge the Dragon Abyss Sword. Dragon Abyss Sword? You have to think carefully. It is only a 14th level divine sword. Don't choose it just because it has a similar name to that ancient divine sword. I remember that in the recipe I gave you, there were some 15th level and even 2 16th level divine weapons. Although the quality of the materials required for a 15th level and 16th level divine weapon is extremely high, once it is successfully forged, it will greatly increase your strength. I understand. But I still want to give it a try. I want to see how profound the Dragon Abyss Sword is after it is forged. In any case, a 14th level divine weapon is enough for me. Seeing that Tsing Hui had already made up his mind, the Hidden Sword Venerable did not force him. He nodded his head and said, "Fine, it's easier to gather the materials required for a 14th level divine weapon. If there's anything else you need, let me know. Tsing Hui swept his gaze over the materials that the hidden sword venerable took out. These are already enough. Good. I will be outside the courtyard. If there's anything you need, just call for me. Okay. The hidden sword venerable nodded his head to Tsing Hui and left the pavilion. Chapter 488. Venerable Hidden Sword. I owe him a favor. If I can't teach the disciple I picked from the hidden sword sect to become an almighty, I'm afraid I won't be able to repay this favor. Standing in the attic, Tsing Hui looked at the massive amount of resources before him that were worth thousands of Taoist rhymes. He could not help but sigh. If he had to collect them all by himself, how long would it take him to collect so many resources? But now, thanks to Venerable Hidden Sword, he had easily skipped the stage of collecting resources that would take an ordinary person a few hundred years to do. Tsing Hui paused for a moment on the resources before he quickly focused his attention on his spiritual world. In his spiritual world, the Golden Crow Divine Soul was affected by the sword will and became a little dispirited. As for the Torch Dragon Divine Soul, it was already weakening and going downhill. If he did not find a way to turn the situation around, the Torch Dragon Divine Soul would definitely collapse in no time. I have to make a choice between the Torch Dragon and the Golden Crow. Sword Tao requires purity. I can't forge two natal divine weapons. Tsing Hui thought of his Dongyang Sword Codex and glanced at the massive amount of resources in the attic that was enough to form 3 or 4 superior-grade golden cores. He immediately came to a decision. With the Golden Crow Divine Soul as the core, he would refine the Golden Crow Divine Soul into a golden core. Furthermore, when the golden core was formed, he would feed the Golden Crow Divine Soul with the Torch Dragon Divine Soul and let the Golden Crow Divine Body devour the Torch Dragon Divine Body. This would allow his Golden Core to break through and become a Golden Core Sovereign. Golden Core Sovereign. Tsing Hui took a deep breath. If he wanted to become a Golden Core Sovereign, his current spiritual power level was still not high enough. Therefore, he still had to explore the use of the broken sword to its limit. Only in this way could he subdue the broken sword. Only in this way could he use the broken sword as a foundation and use the divine blessing technique to forge a divine sword and refine it into his natal divine sword. Cultivation did not take months. In the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. In these 3 months, the Hidden Sword sect enjoyed a rare period of peace. Even though the Hidden Sword Venerable did not appear, nor did he pursue the responsibility of the Aurora Peak and the North Moon Peak, the entire Hidden Sword sect still became harmonious after realizing that the Hidden Sword Venerable was not dead yet. Especially the cultivators who had violated the interests of the Hidden Sword sect, they were even more afraid. Some of the people who had committed serious crimes even took advantage of the fact that the Hidden Sword Venerable had not appeared to secretly escape from the Hidden Sword continent. The standard of the cultivators of the Hidden Sword continent was higher than that of the Eastern Wasteland world. In addition, it was not far from the Heaven Wasteland world, and it was much easier for them to escape safely than from the Eastern Wasteland world. It was understandable that these people chose to leave because they were worried about being held accountable. And these people included the Peak Master of the North Moon Peak, Mu Xingyi, Great Elder Bei Shintong, and Sect Master Qi Xian's disciple, North Moon Xian. Without these people, the reputation of the North Moon Peak plummeted and was no longer as glorious as before. On the other hand, the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce, because Tsing Hui had been summoned by the Hidden Sword Venerable and seemed to be highly regarded by the Hidden Sword Venerable, and considering that Tsing Hui came from the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce, the attitude of the people towards the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce naturally changed greatly. In particular, the decline of the North Moon Peak and the change of ownership of many resource points made the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce the biggest winner. Except for the fact that they did not have a Golden Core expert, they had already vaguely recovered to their peak. Tsing Hui did not know about this. In these 3 months, he maximized the cooperation between the backtracking technique and the broken sword to temper his mind and sharpen his will, causing the level of his mind to increase explosively. In just 3 months, his mind level had already rushed to an astonishing level of 106. 106, this number was close to the limit of the help that the broken sword could provide him. The effects of the broken sword are getting weaker and weaker. Next, I can only reforge the broken sword and the Azure Lotus Divine Sword. According to the sword formula of the Dragon Abyss Sword, coupled with supreme treasures like the Void Fragmentation Divine Stones and Divine Meteorite Metal. I wonder what kind of divine sword I can forge in the end. Xing Hui muttered to himself. Then, he came to the sword forging room on the Burial Sword Peak and took out the broken sword, Azure Lotus Divine Sword, Void Fragmentation Divine Stones, Divine Meteorite Metal, and a series of ores and spiritual items needed to forge the Dragon Abyss Sword. He threw them all into the furnace in the sword forging room. Next, naturally, he used the Divine Protection technique and waited. The characteristics of the Chaos Divine Palace had been so domineering since ancient times. It could even ignore the rules and ignore the materials used to forcefully raise the level of a divine weapon by 1 level, let alone forge a divine weapon by smelting various materials together. Xing Hui just watched from the side, waiting for the Dragon Abyss Sword to be truly forged. As the divine sword gradually took shape, a faint wave of pressure spread out from the sword, and it became stronger and stronger. However, Xing Hui could sense that this wave of pressure did not come from the Dragon Abyss Sword. It came from the 2 main materials of the Dragon Abyss Sword, the Broken Sword and the Azure Lotus Divine Sword. When the 2 of them merged together, the strength of the sword intent increased tremendously, which was why it could create such a shocking wave of pressure. After 20 hours, the wave of pressure that came from the sword intent level of the Dragon Abyss Sword rose to its peak and gradually dissipated. After another hour, the blazing flames in the furnace gradually subsided, and an uncarved divine sword was instantly formed. There was no earth-shattering momentum, nor was there any sword whistling in all directions. Looking at the Dragon Abyss Sword that had returned to its calm state and did not emit any waves of pressure, Xing Hui almost thought that there was a problem with the Divine Protection technique. After pondering for a moment, Xing Hui did not hold the sword. Instead, he released his sword intent and blasted it into the Dragon Abyss Sword. Almost at the instant when his sword intent clashed with the sword intent of the Dragon Abyss Sword, a vast, majestic, blazing, and violent sword intent had already ruthlessly followed the trajectory of his sword intent and blasted into his spiritual world. Furthermore, it continued to crush his spiritual world. This sword intent, feeling the wave of pressure from the sword intent, Xing Hui revealed a faint smile on his face. With the help of this sword intent suppression, it shouldn't be a problem for my spiritual level to rise to level 110. He originally had the idea of using the Divine Protection technique to merge the Azure Lotus Divine Sword and the Broken Sword into one to create an even stronger spiritual impact and use this energy to continue refining his spiritual power. When he turned the 2 of them into materials for the Dragon Abyss Sword, Xing Hui originally thought that the effect would be weakened, but he did not expect, not only did it not weaken, but the pressure from the merging of the 2 sword intents was even stronger than he had imagined. If I can withstand the impact of this sword intent and completely refine this sword intent, I'll be able to borrow the power of this sword intent to subdue the power of the Golden Crow and Torch Dragon divine bodies that have been merged into the Dragon Abyss Sword. By then, the Dragon Abyss Sword that has merged with the power of the 3 would definitely become even stronger. As he thought, Xing Hui held the Dragon Abyss Sword and carefully sensed the characteristics of this level 14 divine weapon. The sword intent was one of the characteristics. The second characteristic, sturdy. After smelting the divine meteorite metal, the Dragon Abyss Sword could be said to be extremely sturdy. The third characteristic came from the Void Fragmentation Divine Stone. Crushing characteristic. As Xing Hui held the divine sword, a powerful sword intent came crashing down. While it was resisting the Dragon Abyss Sword, he raised the sword and slashed it forward. Instantly, layers of ripples spread out from the tip of the sword. It was as though the space was being sliced open by the sword. Under this crushing characteristic, all defensive treasures and divine abilities will be severely restrained. In this way, the power of the Tao of offense that has already reached the extreme will reach a whole new level. As Tsing Hui held the Dragon Abyss sword, he was extremely satisfied with this sword. It's a divine sword. At this moment, Sword Honorable Hidden Sword walked in after hearing the commotion outside the pavilion. That's right. Sword Honorable Hidden Sword looked at the Dragon Abyss sword in Tsing Hui's hand. His eyes lit up when he felt the terrifying sword intent of this divine sword. Great sword. If you can completely subdue the sword intent in this sword, it will be much easier for you to fuse your cultivation into the sword. Moreover, once the fusion is successful, the power of this life-bound sword of yours will become even more terrifying, to the extent that, it will be able to resist divine abilities. Withstand divine abilities? Even though Qing Su had come into contact with divine ability realm experts more than once, he had never actually seen them use their abilities, so he had no idea about the true power of abilities. Now that he heard the Hidden Sword Venerable say that he could actually fend off the abilities of powerful beings if he forged the Dragon Abyss sword into a life-bound sword and fused it together, he immediately asked, just how powerful are the abilities of abilities? Divine abilities are ever-changing and not limited to just one type. Therefore, if you want to ask me how powerful a divine ability is, I can only say that it depends on the person's understanding and application of the divine ability. However, no matter how weak a divine ability is, if used properly, it will have an incredible destructive effect. It is not something that cultivators below the divine ability realm can withstand. This is a terrifying technique that will dominate the world. Tsing Hui nodded after hearing Sword Honorable Hidden Sword's words. As for how powerful a divine ability was, he would have to wait until his cultivation base was high enough to test it out. After being stimulated by your sword essence, I have a feeling that my divine ability, body, and soul will be completely merged with the hidden sword within a year. When that time comes, I will be able to unsheath the divine sword in my hand. Sword Honorable Hidden Sword said with a hint of eagerness, I really hope that day will come soon. A year, very soon. Sword Honorable Hidden Sword nodded heavily. Then, Sword Honorable Hidden Sword explained to Tsing Hui what he needed to pay attention to in order to form the golden core. Then, he left the pavilion. Seeing Sword Honorable Hidden Sword leave, Tsing Hui frowned slightly. He had a feeling that someone was chasing after Sword Honorable Hidden Sword. He had no choice but to quickly find a way to obtain more power. In order to obtain this power, he even gave up his lifespan of 100 or 200 years and chose to take the risk to cultivate the divine sword. Furthermore, Sword Honorable Hidden Sword Honorable Elder made him the supreme elder of the Hidden Sword sect to protect the Hidden Sword sect. He even wanted him to choose a disciple from the Hidden Sword sect to cultivate. It felt as if he was making arrangements for his death. Time waits for no one. After a moment of silence, Tsing Hui did not say anything else. Sword Honorable Hidden Sword, who had already broken through to the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth, had no choice but to take the risk. That kind of enemy was not someone he could easily provoke. What he needed to do now was to complete the tempering of his mind as soon as possible and refine the Hunyuan sword into his natal spiritual sword. Secondly, he needed to condense the golden elixir. Once he refined the Hunyuan sword into his natal spiritual sword, he would melt the golden elixir into it. As for the rest, even if he wanted to help, there was nothing he could do. Qing Su has finally completed the transformation of his cultivation system. I wonder what level he'll reach when he emerges from seclusion with his Qing Su golden core. Will there be a wave of rewards to cheer for Tsing Hui? Chapter 489. Golden Core. Tsing Hui looked at the ball of energy in his body that was completely condensed from blazing energy. Even though it was in a dormant state, it was still emitting a terrifying power. Golden Core. This was his golden core. Moreover, just as he had guessed earlier, his golden core had already reached the high level by relying on the rich foundation accumulated from the divine-grade battle body. Compared to ordinary golden core realm cultivators, his golden core was obviously emitting a trace of gold. However, what surprised him was that apart from this gold color, the blazing aura emitted from the golden core had far exceeded his expectations. The golden core is actually a highly condensed body of energy in the body. When I stepped into the never-ending realm, I chose to build a fusion reactor in my body. At that time, the attribute of my vital essence had already changed, becoming more violent and blazing. Now, even if I compress it into a golden core, the degree of its blazing and violent intensity has not decreased by much. Tsing Hui took a small breath and calmed his mind. Once an ordinary cultivator formed a golden core, the most important thing was to nourish it. During this process, the golden core would continue to grow, advance, and mature until the energy it contained reached a critical point. Then, it would complete its transformation. As for the result of the transformation, either the golden core would collapse, and one's cultivation would go down the drain. At the moment of the golden core's collapse, the body might explode from the power of the golden core and die on the spot. Or, it was to be broken and then re-established, just like the birth of a nascent soul after the core was broken. It evolved into a remarkable power and advanced to a whole new realm, which belonged to the realm of the Almighty. But now, because the attribute of the gold core was too violent and blazing, his gold core could not be said to be peaceful at all. Although the advantage was that every time he used his gold core, it could have an extremely terrifying explosive force, but the consequence was that his gold core was extremely unstable. If he was not careful, it would collapse. If I want to subdue this golden core, I'll have to either break through the spiritual level again, reaching at least level 115 or above, or I'll have to use time to slowly wear down the blazing destructive power within the golden core. I'll have to wait until my body has completely adapted to this power, then continue to nurture it, and eventually derive a divine ability. Unfortunately, Tsing Hui sensed the Torch Dragon divine soul in his spiritual world. After 3 to 4 months, Torch Dragon's soul had already reached the limit of collapse. Even if he deliberately split a portion of his mind to suppress Torch Dragon's soul and prevent it from collapsing, he estimated that it would only last for another month or 2 at most. I can only forcefully condense a peerless grade Jin Dan. However, in the process of condensing the peerless gold core, with the help of the backtracking technique, Tsing Hui's eyes flashed. In the next moment, many of the cultivation resources in the attic that he had moved into his personal space were once again absorbed by him. One by one, they were refined and turned into pure energy that was injected into the golden elixir. The golden core, which was already unstable and filled with a blazing, violent, and destructive aura, was completely broken when more power was poured into it. Before Tsing Hui could raise the power of the golden core to the peak of the upper grade, the entire golden core had already lost control and collapsed with a loud bang, rumble. The violent and destructive air waves wantonly swept out, instantly tearing Tsing Hui's body into pieces and burning it to ashes. The scattered power crazily attacked the cultivation room that originally belonged to the hidden sword venerable, causing the cultivation room that belonged to the Almighty to rumble and shake non-stop. Fortunately, this was the cultivation room of an Almighty. Otherwise, with the terrifying energy contained in Tsing Hui's golden core, once it erupted, the entire burial sword peak would probably be razed to the ground. The destructive energy aftermath would also spread out from the burial sword peak and sweep out dozens of kilometers or even close to 100 kilometers without any reduction in power, igniting and burning everything within the range. After a few hours, Tsing Hui's body that had been reduced to ashes was condensed again. The backtracking technique. This kind of divine technique that did not follow the law of conservation of energy and did not conform to logic had forcefully backtracked him from ashes. Even now, the vast and destructive aura in the cultivation room had not completely dissipated. After carefully recalling the experience of the golden core's imbalance just now, Tsing Hui closed his eyes. While waiting for the backtracking technique to cool down, He did his best to absorb as much experience as possible in order to minimize the mistakes that he would make in his cultivation in the future. The backtracking technique's cooldown was over, and Xing Hui's eyes flashed with a bright light. Again. The next moment, in his personal space, he took out treasures that were worth tens of Taoist rhymes and absorbed and refined the energy contained in them one by one. Very soon, the extremely unstable upper-grade golden core in his body continued to rise. Not long after, it had surpassed the critical point that Xing Hui's golden core had exploded the last time and was climbing towards the peak of the upper-grade golden core. But this time, it was still not peak. The golden core was once again out of balance. The consequences of the golden core's imbalance naturally evolved into a new round of explosion. 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 24 days. Xing Hui spent 24 days and failed a total of 12 times before he finally pushed the upper grade golden core to the peerless grade. Peerless grade golden core. Even among the forces of the first hall, the 3 sects, the 6 schools, and the 9 clans in Tianhuang mainland, they might not be able to nurture a cultivator with a peerless grade golden core in a generation. As long as they could ensure that the cultivator was loyal to their sect, those sects would definitely do their best to complete the nurturing of the golden core and let it mature to the point where it could give birth to divine powers. After all, cultivating a peerless grade golden core was equivalent to crossing the threshold of becoming a powerful figure. And powerful figures, even among the forces of the first hall, the 3 sects, the 6 schools, and the 9 clans, they belonged to the top group and were the true decision-makers of the sections. If they were in the outside world, a powerful figure would be able to create a first-rate sect. Xing Hui did not dare to be happy about the condensation of the peerless grade golden core. At this moment, his torch dragon divine soul had already reached the critical point of collapse. As the golden core advanced, he did not hesitate to fuse the power of the torch dragon divine soul and even the torch dragon divine body into the peerless grade golden core. In an instant, the golden core that was filled with a blazing, violent, and destructive aura underwent a mysterious change and gradually calmed down. Not only that, as the golden core gradually absorbed the power of the torch dragon divine soul and the torch dragon divine body, it also derived various mysterious abilities that were similar to the 3 great talents of the torch dragon divine body. Seeing this, Xing Hui was moved. Why do I have to fuse the torch dragon divine soul into the golden crow divine soul and let the golden crow divine soul devour the power of the torch dragon? As I change my cultivation system, my true core will change from the bloodline of the divine beasts to the natal divine sword. Even if I really want to fuse it, it should be with the natal divine sword. Only by letting the natal divine sword continuously learn from its strong points and make up for its weak points can it become more powerful. With this thought, Xing Hui quickly stopped the fusion of the golden crow divine soul and the torch dragon divine body. He waved his hand and the dragon abyss sword that had been subdued by his sword will in the past month appeared in front of him. The dragon abyss sword was personally forged by him, so it had an innate affinity with him. In addition, his own sword intent and the sword intent of the dragon abyss sword came from the same source, so it was much easier to refine the dragon abyss sword into his natal divine sword than other divine swords. Dragon abyss. Torch dragon, the 2 of you are fated. Xing Hui chuckled. In the next moment, the torch dragon divine soul appeared and the torch dragon divine body appeared. Then, the 2 became one. Using the sword refining method of the extreme sword Tao, they directly imprinted into the natal divine sword as if they were branded. With the injection of this power, the natal divine sword shook violently and exuded a powerful aura. It was as if it could not bear the power of the torch dragon divine soul and torch dragon divine body. However, the dragon abyss sword was a level 14 divine weapon after all. There was also a powerful sword will in it. In addition, Xing Hui also used his own sword will to suppress it. After 3 days, the power of the torch dragon finally calmed down. As for completely fusing it into one, he still needed to use his own sword will to polish it. The power of the torch dragon is already at the end of its tether. In addition, the torch dragon divine body is relatively gentle. It is easier to refine it into the dragon abyss sword. The key is the power of the golden crow. Xing Hui sensed the peerless golden core in his body that was formed by the power of the golden crow. There was a kind of happy distress in his heart. It was not that the power of his golden core was too weak, but, with all kinds of accumulation, his golden core was accidentally too strong. It was so strong that it was many times more difficult for him to refine it into his natal divine sword than it was for the power of the torch dragon. However, even though it was difficult, he had to do it. It was just a matter of time. If 1 month was not enough, he would do it in 2 months. If 2 months were not enough, he would do it in half a year. If half a year was not enough, he would do it in 1 year. If 1 year was not enough, he would do it in 3 years. He would eventually be able to complete the refining of the power of the golden crow, the power of the torch dragon, and the natal divine sword. From then on, his sword Dao would no longer be an empty concept of sword Dao. Instead, it would truly have the ability to fight and protect. Swoosh! A ray of sword light landed steadily in a lush mountain forest. Although the forest was lush, the mountain was filled with the presence of people. Less than 100 kilometers from the mountain range was a large city with a population of 1 million. There was also a rather famous sect on the mountain range, called the Sword of Cosmic Light sect. Even though the Sword of Cosmic Light sect had only been established for less than 100 years, it had already become the largest sect in an area of almost 10,000 kilometers. There were over 10 Golden Core Realm experts in the sect and over 100 Saint Realm experts in the sect. The most shocking thing was that there was an almighty figure in the sect. A large sect like that might be weaker among first-rate sects, but compared to ordinary second-rate sects, it was enough for them to look up to. Coupled with the fact that the Sword of Cosmic Light sect seemed to be extremely good at business, countless people came to the Sword of Cosmic Light sect every year to learn from their master. At this moment, as the ray of sword light landed in the Sword of Cosmic Light sect, several Golden Core experts came up to receive it at the same time. They bowed respectfully. "Greetings, Founding Master." Yes. The ray of sword light dispersed, revealing the person inside. If Xing Hui were here right now, he would definitely be able to recognize him immediately. To no surprise, this man was the powerful being who had gone to the eastern wasteland and captured him alive before torturing him for over 20 hours, Remnant Sword. After 15 months of traveling, he had finally returned to Heaven's wasteland. He had returned to the sect that he had created and secretly hung under the Heaven's Dome sect. Has anything important happened in the sect during this time? There's nothing important that needs to disturb you, Founding Master, said a Golden Core cultivator respectfully. A Golden Core Realm cultivator said respectfully. After a while, he seemed to have thought of something and suddenly said, "There is a disciple who said that he found a clue about the person you specially wanted to ask about." The person I wanted to ask about? A gleam of light immediately shone through Remnant Sword's eyes. He appeared before the Golden Core cultivator with a flash and asked impatiently, "Where is that person?" Chapter 490. In the Sword of Cosmic Light sect. A man who had reached the Transcendent Realm bowed respectfully to Remnant Sword. Disciple Jiang Fang greets Ancestral Master. Okay, tell me about the clue you got. If it's useful, I'll reward you handsomely. Remnant Sword said in a deep voice. He had asked everyone in the living room to leave. Even though the people in the Sword of Cosmic Light sect were his personal force and were all loyal to him, the sect was still under the sky. He couldn't guarantee that no one was loyal to the sky. The clue I got is related to the Hidden Sword Continent. Ancestral Master, didn't you ask us to find someone? According to Ancestral Master, this person looks very young and is as powerful as a Golden Elixir Realm expert. He also cultivates the bloodlines of the Torch Dragon and the Golden Crow. What's more incredible is that he's cultivated both bloodlines to the Divine Grade Battle Body level. A friend I met in the Chaos Divine Palace is a disciple of the Hidden Sword sect. The mountain they're on, the North Moon Peak, is being suppressed by an expert who's also very young and has both the Golden Crow and the Torch Dragon. The only problem is, he's much more powerful than a Golden Elixir Realm expert. Young, Golden Crow Divine Body, Torch Dragon Divine Body, Remnant Sword's eyes flashed when he heard the information. There were many people who had awakened the Golden Crow bloodline and the Torch Dragon bloodline in this world. Even those who had cultivated both bloodlines to the level of a divine grade battle body were not uncommon. However, it was rare for someone to have both bloodlines and a divine grade battle body at the same time, especially when the person looked so young. Very good. The Hidden Sword Continent. Remnant Sword's eyes flashed. I'll verify it with this information. You've reached the Transcendent Realm? You haven't reached the Transcendent Realm because your soul is too weak. I happen to have a strand of vital spirit chi. I believe it'll be helpful to you. Consider it a reward for finding this clue for me. Jiang Fong was pleasantly surprised. Thank you, Ancestral Master. Remnant Sword gave the vital spirit chi to Jiang Fong and said sternly, remember, you can't tell anyone else about this. Don't worry, Ancestral Master. I won't let anyone know even if I die. Okay, go. Yes. Jiang Fong retreated happily after obtaining a strand of nascent divinity chi. The market price of the primordial spirit chi was close to 20 Dao runes. Even if it was purchased internally, it would cost more than 10 Dao runes. For a cultivator of the Heaven Wasteland domain, the income of this amount of Dao runes was almost equivalent to 10 years of his income. If he sold it, whether it was a 10th grade divine weapon or a 9th grade armor, it would be a piece of cake. Hidden Sword Continent. It's said that there's an almighty there. However, I remember that they seem to have designs on the Hidden Sword Continent. Remnant Sword's eyes flashed. The next moment, his power was projected into the Chaos Temple. As his appearance changed, he teleported again and appeared in a vast personal space. This personal space was not inferior to the personal space of celestial being in the sky. It was the core of the Heavenly Way's communication in the Chaos Temple. There were as many experts in the Heavenly Way as there were clouds. It was not strange for someone to have a 10th grade personal space. Moreover, the level of management of this personal space was more than double that of celestial being in the sky. In the sky of this personal space, there were 2 suns. The brilliance of the suns was not inferior to that of the sun core in the sky. In particular, there was a divine beast Golden Crow entrenched in the core of one of the suns. Its aura could be said to be mighty and mighty. Even Remnant Sword, a powerful expert, was frightened when he glanced at the divine beast Golden Crow. Divine beast. That was a real adult divine beast. A divine beast at the first level of the Saint Realm. It was said that the Heavenly Tao had been thinking of ways to nurture this divine beast over the years in order for it to grow again. If it could be nurtured to the 14th level, which was the second level of the Saint Realm, its battle strength would leap to the top of the Infinite Wasteland domain and would not be inferior to the top 10 experts on the Infinite Wasteland domain list. In addition to this divine beast, there were several other holy lands in this huge personal space. For example, in the tomb of the divine beast Hunyuan, there was the corpse of an adult Hunyuan. In addition, there was the Hunyuan Mountain, the Qilin Peak, the Nanming Volcano, the Azure Dragon Sea, and so on. The divine beast Hunyuan, the divine beast Qilin, the Vermilion Bird, the Azure Dragon, and so on lived there. This kind of foundation was far from what other forces could imagine. This was also the reason why the celestial being, the divine wilderness, and the eternal being allied together dared to go against the entire Chaos Divine Hall. If not for the fact that the 3 Chaos organizations were unable to truly cooperate wholeheartedly, the Chaos Divine Hall in this world would not have space for the other Chaos organizations to exist. Remnant Sword looked at the 2 blazing suns in the sky for a moment and lowered his head with a complicated expression. Back then. When he found out about his identity, he almost instinctively denied his relationship with the Li Hen holy man. However, as time passed, he was stuck in the Aurus core stage and could not break through. The vast amount of resources required to form a superior-grade Aurus core almost made him despair. In addition, he later witnessed the strength of the heavenly way. Powerful Saint Realm Tao masters and adult divine beasts with destructive power instantly destroyed his last bit of persistence in the celestial being. He understood that if he really stubbornly stayed in the celestial being, there would be a day when the heavenly way launched an attack on the celestial being. Therefore, after a long and painful choice, he chose to face reality and made a decision that maximized his own interests. Thus, he turned his back on the celestial being and joined the heavenly way. Reality proved that he was right. With the support of the heavenly axiom, he had cultivated a remarkable ability and possessed strength and status that ordinary people could not imagine. In terms of mentality, there had also been a huge change. Just like now, the entire sky had become very worried because of the threat of the heavenly axiom, and he, as he belonged to the heavenly way, there was no need for him to worry at all. All he needed to do was deliver a fatal blow to the celestial being the moment the heavenly way and the celestial being clashed, and then enjoy the great merit. When he thought up to there, the surprise in his eyes gradually vanished. With a flash, he had already appeared on a mountain peak that belonged to him. Afterwards, he waved his hand gently and an external member of the heavenly way immediately appeared before him. The member bowed politely and said, "What are your orders, true Lord Enlai?" Enlai. That was the codename of the heavenly way. Get the disciple of the sect Lord of the Scarlet Mystery sect, North Moon Xian, and the people connected to their mountain peak to come see me. Yes, true Lord. The heavenly way was different from the celestial being. There was a strict hierarchy in the heavenly way. It was nowhere near as relaxed as the celestial being. The members of the heavenly way were divided into 8 ranks. At the very top were obviously the 8 Tao paragons, below them were the 36 Tao lords, and below them was the true lord that Cruel Sword currently belonged to. Neither North Moon Xian nor Bei Shentong, who had joined the heavenly way later, were true lords, so summoning the 2 of them was obviously a piece of cake for him. Before long, North Moon Xian, Bei Shentong, and the previous lord of the North Moon Peak, Mu Xingyi, appeared before Cruel Sword at the same time. Greetings to the true lord. May I ask why the true lord has summoned us? I want to ask you about some information. Cruel Sword had an innate mental advantage over Bei Shentong and the others, so there was obviously no need for him to waste time worrying about their feelings. He cut straight to the chase. Your North Moon Peak followed the plan of our heavenly way to take control of the Hidden Sword continent, but over a year ago, a mysterious person interfered with your plans. I want to ask you about the specific information of that mysterious person, such as his abilities, methods, chaotic level, divine weapons, and so on. That mysterious person. North Moon Xian, Bei Shentong, and the others looked at one another. In the end, Mu Xingyi, who had personally clashed with Tsing Hui, stepped forward and said, that mysterious person's battle prowess is extremely great. We once guessed that he should be a peak expert who has condensed a high-grade golden core, but as we thought back over the years and speculated a little, we discovered that his cultivation should not have reached golden core yet. He's probably only at the endless realm. However, he has awakened the bloodlines of the Golden Crow and Torch Dragon, and he has cultivated both bloodlines to the level of a divine tier battle physique, which is why he can erupt with battle prowess that's no weaker than a high-grade golden core. In particular, he has a supreme treasure that can turn into 7 suns once he unleashes it. The 7 suns fuse with one another and form a strange existence similar to a domain, allowing his battle prowess to skyrocket, 7 suns forming something similar to a domain. Mu Xingyi's introduction immediately made Cruel Sword's eyes flash. He suddenly thought of the series of reports that the Fortune Profound sect, a subordinate organization of the Heavenly Tao in the Eastern Wastelands, had sent over when it was destroyed. He immediately waved his hand, and an image appeared before Mu Xingyi. To no surprise, it was the scene of Tsing Hui unleashing the 10 suns burn the heavens. Is it this ability? Yes, yes, yes. It's this ability. Mu Xingyi looked at it and immediately agreed in a hurry. Does he still possess the recovery ability of the 10th step? Yes. His recovery ability has definitely reached the 10th step. Do you understand him so well, true monarch? Mu Xingyi replied in pleasant surprise. Very good. I've finally found you. A sliver of excitement flashed through Cruel Sword's eyes when he received Mu Xingyi's confirmation. This was a son of chaos at the 40th step. However, this was not the main point. The main point was the secret behind how he had reached the 40th step. Was it because of Bei Zhao's supreme divine artifact? Do you have any trustworthy people in the Hidden Sword sect? I want you to pay close attention to this kid's movements and report to me immediately if there's any news. We do, but, that Yuqin brat has been chosen by our Hidden Sword sect's ancestor, the Hidden Sword Venerable. He has been receiving the careful teachings of the Hidden Sword Venerable for more than a year. We have no way of coming into contact with him, Hidden Sword Venerable. Cruel Sword frowned. He naturally had some understanding of this ancient almighty who had cultivated for thousands of years. According to what I know, the Hidden Sword Venerable is about to die of old age. How can he still teach disciples? True monarch, you may not know this. Not only did our ancestor not die, but he also broke through the shackles of his cultivation and stepped into a higher realm. We estimate that he has already reached the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. He should have relied on this breakthrough to regain his vitality and extend his life, lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. When Cruel Sword heard this, his expression instantly became somewhat ugly. Tsing Hui had actually been chosen by a peak saint expert. It would be troublesome to capture him alive now. It seemed like he could only wait until he left the Hidden Sword sect alone before taking action. Furthermore, this time, in order to ensure that nothing goes wrong, he would have to make a trip to the Li Hen holy man's palace and borrow that supreme treasure. Chapter 491. Hidden Sword Continent, Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce. Calculating the time, it had been 2 years since the Hidden Sword Venerable had erupted with sword intent and Qing Su had set foot on the Burial Sword Peak. Even though the Hidden Sword Venerable had never appeared to tidy up the Hidden Sword sect and Qing Su had never emerged from the Burial Sword Peak, the situation of the Divine Grace Merchant Association had clearly improved greatly during this time. With the help of Su Zhao's business methods and the resources from the North Moon Peak, the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce had recovered to its peak. At present, not only had the scale of the trade association expanded by several times, the number of experts in the trade association had also increased by a large margin. Not only had the number of never-ending stage elders increased to 6, but they had also recruited 2 golden core stage experts. As for transformative stage and true energy stage cultivators, they had also increased by several dozen people. Su Xiao, Su Tong, Xing Lian, Si Tong and the rest of the core members of the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce were extremely grateful to Tsing Hui. It's been 2 years. I wonder when Mr. Yuqin will come down from the Burial Sword Peak. Su Xiao looked in the direction of the Burial Sword Peak with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. As the number of experts in the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce increased, coupled with Hidden Sword Supreme and Tsing Hui's power, Su Xiao had gradually become idle after more than a year. He was now with Su Tong, Su Yuan and the other core members of the Chamber of Commerce, enjoying the free time. Mr. Yuqin is the only sword Dao genius in the Hidden Sword sect in the past few hundred years to have attracted the 100 Swords chant at the same time. He must have become the personal disciple of Hidden Sword Supreme. He must have been in seclusion during this period. Cultivators who can form the Golden Core have at least 1,000 years of life. 2 years is a long time for us, but for them, it is only a month at most. Su Tong said with a smile. He shouldn't have become the disciple of Hidden Sword Supreme, right? Mr. Yuqing also has a master, but it should be true that he's receiving guidance from Venerable Hidden Sword. After all, Mr. Yuqing's master sent him to the Hidden Sword continent with the intention of receiving guidance from Venerable Hidden Sword. If that's the case, does that mean that my master and Venerable Hidden Sword are actually master and disciple? Can I call Hidden Sword Supreme Grandmaster from now on? Su Yuan was overjoyed. In these 2 years, not only had his cultivation improved and reached the realm of true qi, his personality had also become much more cheerful than before. Don't call me that. It would be terrible if you bring trouble to Mr. Yuqing. Su Xiao hurriedly warned. She had a deep respect for the Hidden Sword Venerable. I don't think so. Mr. Yuqing has stayed on Hidden Sword Venerable's mountain for 2 years. You can see how much Hidden Sword Venerable values Mr. Yuqing. Hidden Sword Venerable wouldn't disrespect young Master Yuqing. Moreover, young Master Yuqing is the descendant of Hidden Sword Venerable's disciple. Su Tong said. Hearing this, Su Xiao nodded. At the same time, she sincerely felt that her younger brother was lucky to have such an opportunity. Little brother, you must remember to respect your teacher in the future. You must be filial to your teacher, do you hear me? Our entire Divine Grace Merchant Guild was able to avoid the fate of being annexed because of Mr. Yuqing's help. If I find out that you disrespected Mr. Yuqing, I will be the first to not let you off. Sister, don't worry. I respect Master Yuqing very much. How could I offend him? Su Tong was about to say something when she saw Si Tong quickly flying over on his sword. From afar, she could hear his joyful shout, "It's open! It's open! The Burial Sword Peaks Array is open! The Burial Sword Peaks Array is open!" Su Tong, Su Xiao and the others were slightly stunned. Then, they immediately realized something. Hidden Sword Venerable and Mr. Yuqing are coming out. Yes. They are definitely coming out. Let's go and see. Let's go and welcome Master Hidden Sword Venerable. Su Xiao said impatiently. Immediately, Su Tong took out her flying sword and brought Su Yuan along. Su Xiao flew on her own sword and the group quickly headed towards the Burial Sword Peak. They weren't the only ones. As the news spread, more and more cultivators flew on their swords and rushed towards the Burial Sword Peak. In an instant, thousands of sword lights converged into a torrent and filled the sky above the Hidden Sword Sect. The sky above the Hidden Sword Sect was dyed in a dazzling light. Master Hidden Sword Venerable has been in seclusion for 100 years. Now that he has finally come out, our Hidden Sword Sect will definitely be able to. Su Xiao's face was filled with joy as she flew on her sword. Before she could finish her words, a sword light had already rushed into the sky. It carried a vast and mighty pressure as it dispersed from the Burial Sword Peaks Array. The vast and majestic power and the sharpness that tore through the void immediately shocked all the cultivators who were heading towards the Burial Sword Peak. Not to mention the disciples of the Immortality Stage, even the Endless Stage, Golden Core Stage Elders, Supreme Elders, and Doyens felt a sense of fear from the bottom of their hearts after witnessing the shocking sword chi that shot into the sky from the Burial Sword Peak. Just the shockwaves from the shocking sword chi alone gave them the illusion that they would be obliterated the moment they came into contact with it. Patriarch's cultivation has improved even more than before. Although Master stepped into the Transcendent Stage back then, the power of his sword chi hadn't reached such a level. But now, just the power of this sword chi has far surpassed ordinary transcendent powers. If he used his transcendent powers, how powerful would his lethality be? During this period of time, with Master Hidden Sword Venerable in seclusion, countless forces have infiltrated our Hidden Sword continent, wanting to take over our Hidden Sword sect. One of them is the Supreme Elder of the Chaos Organization, another is the Heavenly Tao. In addition, there are many other Chaos Organizations who are either secretly supporting or simply sending people across the sea to infiltrate our Hidden Sword continent to establish their own sects and threaten our Hidden Sword sect's position as the overlord of the Hidden Sword continent. Now, not only has Master come out of seclusion, his cultivation has also improved greatly. When the time comes, he will definitely be able to crush all these sects and forces into dust like the autumn wind sweeping away fallen leaves. Many endless stage and golden core stage cultivators who were flying towards the burial sword peak had uncontrollable joy on their faces. Congratulations, Sword Venerable, for your sword principle mastery. On the burial sword peak, Xing Hui was standing not far from Hidden Sword Venerable. He sincerely congratulated Hidden Sword Venerable, who had become one with his sword and released a shocking sword light. After 2 years, Hidden Sword Venerable had finally completed the final fusion of his cultivation and natal legendary sword, combining them into one. As for the sword light just now, just the sword chi that was released from the fusion of the two was far inferior to the sword Hidden Sword Venerate had unleashed with his natal divine sword. Ha ha ha, I have to congratulate you too. Your cultivation and natal legendary sword have also completed the fusion, right? I'm very curious to see how powerful your natal legendary sword will be after the fusion. I believe Hidden Sword Venerable is also very curious about the power of his natal legendary sword. This is Hidden Sword Venerable's home ground, why don't we find a place to test it out? Xing Hui smiled slightly. Half a month ago, he had also completed the fusion of his cultivation and natal legendary sword. However, at that time, Hidden Sword Venerable was at the critical moment of the fusion of his natal legendary sword. He spontaneously stood guard by Hidden Sword Venerable's side and did not immediately go out. That's what I was thinking. Hidden Sword Venerable said and immediately jumped up. He pointed his finger and a sword chi formed under his feet. Then, he flew out of the formation outside the burial sword peak in an instant. Grand Master. Greetings, Master. Congratulations, Grand Master, for your great improvement in cultivation and divine power. The moment Hidden Sword Venerable rushed out of the burial sword peak, many cultivators who had heard the news and appeared outside the burial sword peak saluted in surprise and excitement. Hidden Sword Venerable's figure that was rushing into the void paused slightly. He waved to the crowd and said, "Gather all the leaders of the Hidden Sword sect and gather at the sword appraising platform in 3 days. I have something important to announce. Now, all of you are dismissed. I don't need you to welcome me." After that, he turned around and looked at Xing Hui who was following behind him. He smiled and said, "Young friend Xing Hui, let's go. Sword Venerable, please." Qing Su made a gesture of greeting. I can't wait to see the true power of the ultimate sword principle. Hidden Sword Venerable laughed. In the next moment, the sword light pierced through the air and directly accelerated to the breaking of the sound barrier. With a series of roars, it instantly disappeared into the horizon. Xing Hui stood in the void and nodded to Su Xiao, Su Tong, Su Yuan and the others who were looking in his direction in surprise. He did not want to keep Hidden Sword Venerable waiting for too long, so he tore through the void and caught up with him. They're out, they're out. Hidden Sword Venerable's Grandmaster and Master are out. Mr. Yuqing is greeting us. Did you see that? Mr. Yuqing is greeting us. He definitely did not forget to mention our Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce to Hidden Sword Venerable. I think Hidden Sword Venerable is gathering all the leaders of the sect at the sword appraising platform in 3 days to talk about our Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce and the various matters that have happened in the past 100 years. When Mr. Yuqing comes back, we will definitely thank him properly. When the people of Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce saw Xing Hui again, they were instantly excited. Seeing them like this, the people of Hidden Sword sect were naturally envious, while the people of Aurora Peak and North Moon Peak looked bitter. Even the people of Hidden Sword Peak were no exception. Hidden Sword Venerable actually called Mr. Yuqing young friend just now. He actually treated him as an equal. This. Sigh, 3 days later. This day has finally come. Even though I've made many mistakes over the years, I can't abandon the Hidden Sword sect like the people of North Moon Peak. When the time comes, if Grandmaster wants to beat me or punish me, I'll accept it. Sword Venerable seems to be even stronger than before. Looks like our hidden sword sect will welcome a new round of vigorous development. I've always been a good choice. 3 days later, North Moon Peak, Aurora Peak, and Hidden Sword Peak will all be heavily punished. At that time, our Jade Yang Peak might be able to take the opportunity to rise up. From Sword Venerable's attitude towards Mr. Yuqing obviously has a lot of influence on him. Looks like I have to find an opportunity to meet Mr. Yuqing within 3 days. The people of North Moon Peak, Aurora Peak, and Hidden Sword Peak were uneasy, but the people of the other peaks had different thoughts in their hearts. For a time, the entire Burial Sword Peak could be said to be filled with all kinds of emotions. Chapter 492. Whoosh! Both Tsinghui and Hidden Sword Honorable were extremely fast. They had a natural advantage when it came to tearing through the air with their swords. However, it also consumed a lot of true qi. Fortunately, both Tsinghui and Hidden Sword Honorable did not care about the consumption of true qi. They flew at full speed. In a moment of excitement, they decided to compete with the speed of their swords. 2 streaks of sword radiance tore through the sky above the continent and crossed thousands of kilometers before rushing into the sky above a huge mountain. No wonder it's a level 10 recovery ability. You're flying with your sword aura and tearing through the void. Your flying speed is much faster than cultivators of the same level. However, the consumption of true qi is 2 to 3 times more than when you're flying with your sword. At this speed, you can fly for 2 hours without panting or blushing. I have to say, the level 10 recovery ability is extremely powerful. The Sword Venerable of the Hidden Sword stopped and looked at Qing Su, who seemed to be normal. He was envious. His chaotic level was a mess. Not only did he not have the recovery ability, but he also did not have the sword talent and comprehension ability. Naturally, he was envious of Tsinghui, who had the recovery ability. You're flattering me, Honorable Sword Honorable. In fact, if you didn't control your flying speed, I wouldn't have been able to catch up with you. Our flying speed originates from the sword qi emitted from our natal swords, and the strength of the sword qi is directly related to the strength of our natal swords. My natal swords have been refined to the level of a celestial phenomenon of heaven and earth expert, so the sword qi derived from it is naturally extremely tyrannical. However, your sword essence is a lot purer than mine, and your growth potential is also above mine. I believe that when you reach the level of celestial phenomenon of heaven and earth, the power of your natal swords will definitely be stronger than mine. Hidden Sword Honorable said. As for Tsinghui, he did not deny this point. The ultimate sword Dao not only included the power of the natal swords, but also the strength of the core of the sword Dao. The relationship between the two was like a cultivator's cultivation and magic power. They complemented each other and were indispensable. Although Hidden Sword Venerable had a high cultivation level, he was not much better than Tsinghui in terms of sword essence. Tsinghui's sword essence was much purer than Hidden Sword Venerable's. In the future, as long as Tsinghui increased the power of his natal holy sword, his strength would definitely surpass Hidden Sword Venerable's. Tsinghui, you may have the special ability to recover at the 10th level, but you can't rely on it to fight recklessly. You should be able to sense how weak I am after losing my cultivation. Without the protection of the Constitution, you'll probably be reduced to ashes if you're hit by an enemy. You won't even be able to be reborn from a single drop of blood. Tsinghui nodded solemnly. At first, the divine body he had forged existed in his body. Even though it hadn't manifested, it was still like he was wearing an extremely strong armor. Once he was attacked, his body would manifest and offset the damage. But now, almost all of the power in his body had been refined into his natal holy sword. Other than some basic true origin, it was equivalent to giving up all of his defenses and exposing himself to the enemy. It would be better if the enemy attacked him head-on. He could use the power of his natal holy sword to forcefully break through any of the enemy's attacks. However, if the enemy chose to sneak up on him, even though his natal holy sword had been infused with the power of a peerless golden core, it wouldn't be strange for it to be killed by a prominent divine expert. The characteristics and drawbacks of the ultimate sword principle make you have to be careful in whatever you do. When you're in trouble, you have to weigh the pros and cons. If you don't want to, you can turn around and leave. Once you do, you can't hold back and kill without mercy. It's best to eliminate the source of trouble. Otherwise, you can't defend against the enemy's secret revenge forever. Hidden Sword Venerable said solemnly. Xing Hui nodded solemnly. All of his power had been refined into his natal holy sword. His body had become his biggest weakness. It seemed like he had to rethink his plan to cultivate his physical body. With his current ability, even if he released his physical body for another 8 to 10 times, the increase in strength he would obtain would still not be worth mentioning. However, with the increase in the strength of his physical body, his reaction, the speed of his sword, the tenacity of his nerves, and his eyesight would all be significantly strengthened. In this way, he would naturally have more confidence in dealing with danger. Let's not talk about those complicated things for now. Now, let me see just how powerful this natal divine sword that I have refined with all my cultivation is. Hidden Sword Venerable laughed. I'll wait and see. Xing Hui stepped back slightly. The two of them were considered to be the only two sword cultivators in the world. Naturally, there was a natural closeness between the two of them. It was like meeting a fellow countryman in a land full of foreigners. Even if the two of them had never met before, they could quickly become good friends. Sword, come. Hidden Sword Venerable clenched his fist and a ray of sword radiance appeared from his body. It landed on his hand and turned into the hidden edge sword. The moment this natal holy sword that had been infused with the cultivation of an astronomical phenomenon expert appeared, a terrifying aura surged into the sky. Under the guidance of the sword will, it turned into an invincible and terrifying sword radiance. Even though the sword radiance was not under Hidden Sword Venerable's control, it was enough to make Xing Hui's face turn serious. He had a feeling that the power of Hidden Sword Venerable's natal holy sword was much stronger than he had imagined. Hidden Edge, you've been hiding your power for so many years. Today, it's finally time for you to show your true power. Hidden Sword Saint laughed loudly. Suddenly, his sword intent burst out. His sword intent fused with his sword and slashed forward. For a moment, the space in front of him seemed to be filled with sword light. Invisible ripples followed the sword light and tore the space and vitality around it apart. Even the light seemed to be distorted by the path of the sword light. It made the space and vitality around it look like it was being torn apart. Even the light seemed to be distorted in the path of the sword light, making it look like the space was being torn apart. Rumble. As Hidden Sword Master struck the ground with his sword, an earth-shaking rumble erupted from the ground. Countless rocks, plants, trees, and hills were brutally torn apart by this streak of sword light. A massive fissure that was 1,000 meters deep and 100,000 meters long was formed amidst this violent rumble. Massive shockwaves spread out in all directions with this fissure as the epicenter. Large amounts of mountains collapsed, trees were pulverized, and countless fierce beasts and spirit beasts were shaken to death. Even Qin Su, who was mentally prepared, still could not help but narrow his eyes when he saw this terrifying power that seemed to be on the level of a world-destroying calamity. Thankfully, Hidden Sword Venerable was testing the power of this sword strike in a wild mountain. If it was in a crowded place, this sword strike would not only leave a huge hole as long as over 100 miles on the ground, but also cause an earthquake that could reach hundreds of miles away, causing great suffering to all living beings within hundreds of miles. Even living beings within 1,000 miles away would feel the earthquake to a certain extent, shattering porcelain and breaking pots. Some dilapidated houses might even collapse. Islands like Dragon Chant Island and Colored Glaze Island could be completely cut into two halves with just one slash. Even for a large island like Dragon Slaying Island, the tremor caused by this slash could bring about a devastating disaster. This power, it wasn't inferior to a great sacred art. To Hidden Sword Venerable, this power was just a sword that he used with his natal holy sword. Hidden Sword Venerable looked at the huge crack in the ground and seemed to be shocked by the power of this sword. After a while, he couldn't help but laugh. Great! 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 This is the sword principle that I want. This is the true power of the ultimate sword principle in my heart. Killing a divine. This is not a lie. 2 divine state experts are fighting to the death. If Hidden Sword Venerable intervenes when the enemy's divine state expert is distracted, he would be treated as a divine state expert. Tsing Hui said from the bottom of his heart. In terms of destructive power, Hidden Sword Venerable's natal holy sword was indeed not weaker than any divine state expert. Even if he were to attack, he could still fight a divine state expert head-on. What he was afraid of was, if the divine state expert diverted part of his power to stop his attack and used other means to attack him, the advantages of the ultimate sword principle were obvious, but so were its disadvantages. There were too many limitations. Alright, Tsing Hui, it's your turn. Let me see how powerful your natal holy sword has become after cultivating the ultimate sword principle. Hidden Sword Venerable was very satisfied with the ultimate sword principle that he had created. After a while, he put his natal holy sword back into his body and continued to nourish it. Then, he turned to look at Tsing Hui. Qing Su nodded. In the next moment, the long Yuan sword had already appeared in his hand. Hidden Sword Venerable looked at the long Yuan sword. When he saw the sword, he felt as if his mind was being taken over by the sword. However, he had a strong will and the long Yuan sword wasn't attacking him. Therefore, this feeling didn't affect him much. Even so, this change still surprised him. Your sword, after the Dragon Abyss sword was fused with the power I cultivated, it underwent quite a few changes. It is completely different from the real Dragon Abyss sword. Based on these characteristics, I gave it a new name, the Scarlet Abyss sword. The Deep Red Sword. Hidden Sword Venerable looked at the rising fiery light on the deep red sword and nodded. Let's give it a try. Tsing Hui nodded and stepped forward. The final result of giving up the bloodline principle to cultivate the ultimate sword principle depended on this moment. Chapter 493. Buzz Buzz. The sword essence exploded. In order to test the power of his natal legendary sword, Tsing Hui unleashed all his sword essence. The sword intent nurtured by the Eastern Yang sword scripture was the purest of Yang in the first place. It was brilliant and vast, and whether it was the power of the golden crow or the power of the torch dragon, they all had an extraordinary relationship with the sun. As the Green Ruin's sword intent drew out the power within the Scarlet Abyss sword, the Scarlet Abyss sword in his hand immediately erupted with light. It was like a scorching sun, shining so brightly that it was almost blinding. On one side, the sword Venerable Hidden Sword squinted his eyes slightly as he witnessed the profundity of Qing Su's attack. The brilliant sword intent in Qing Su's spiritual world reached its peak as well, and then, the sword was drawn. Like before, he slashed his sword at the ground. However, as he swung out, the Hidden Sword Venerable could clearly sense that his mind was completely attached to the Green Ruin strike, but before the strike had even struck the ground, a deafening rumble suddenly rang out from the ground. It hit. The sword light had already cut into the ground. This sudden change made Hidden Sword Venerable's heart skip a beat. How could he only see half of the sword? If he was the enemy of this sword strike, he would have already been struck by this sword strike just as he was about to assume a defensive posture and defend with all his might. How shocking was that kind of destructive power and impact? Could it be that the sword transcended space? No. It was my senses that had been blinded. My spirit and vision were completely blinded by that sword strike. Even though that sword strike had already been executed, my senses, spirit, and thoughts were still stuck at the moment when that sword strike was executed. Hidden Sword Venerable, who instantly understood the power of the sword, was shocked. It's impossible to defend against such a sword technique. However, after a while, he glanced at the ground. When he saw the terrifying trench on the ground that was 60,000 meters long and 600 meters deep, his eyes lit up. Good. Qing Su also looked at the huge chasm on the ground, and a sliver of surprise flashed through his eyes. The power of your life-bound sword is far greater than I imagined. If an ordinary divine tier expert were to use their full strength to blast the ground, they would only be able to cause damage up to 100 kilometers in radius and tremors up to 1,000 kilometers, but the depth would only be 200 to 300 meters. Yet your sword is 60 kilometers long and less than 3 kilometers wide, but the depth of the fissure is 600 meters deep. Its power is not inferior to a divine tier expert's ability at all. Furthermore, I'm talking about an offensive natal legendary sword. The Sword Venerable of the Hidden Sword had remained a great figure for over 1,000 years. He had even reached the celestial phenomenon realm 100 years ago, so he was obviously extremely experienced. His evaluation of the power of the Green Ruins life-bound sword was basically close to the mark. Natal Legendary Sword has reached the level of an Almighty's Natal Legendary Sword technique. Qing Su thought back to the various difficulties he had faced when he fused the extremely unstable golden core into his life-bound sword. He sighed emotionally at the benefits he had reaped. An Almighty. After 2 years, he could truly be called an Almighty. Even though, other than their attacks, they were much weaker than the Almighties in all other aspects, but, at least he was no longer defenseless against an Almighty. In fact, if he met an Almighty who did not know what was going on, he could use the backtracking skill to fight with them. He might even be able to defeat an Almighty or even kill him. From this moment on, he dared to say that he had the power to protect himself in this world. It's not as simple as an ordinary Almighty. As Tsing Hui sighed, Hidden Sword Venerable seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly said, Tsing Hui, the power of your natal legendary sword is not as simple as it seems on the surface. It should have a certain effect of disrupting one's divine soul. I did not face the true power of your sword, but I could feel that my senses were disrupted by the mysterious power in your sword. As a result, I could clearly feel that your sword had just pierced through the air, but then there was a loud boom from the ground. It had already hit its target. With this mysterious change, its power should be even more shocking than what we have seen so far. Hearing Hidden Sword Venerable's words, Tsing Hui immediately understood. This was a change brought about by the power of the Torch Dragon. The Torch Dragon's divine body had the special ability of backlighting. Very good. Qing Su looked at the Scarlet Abyss sword in his hand. He never thought that this life-bound sword would mainly use the power of the Golden Crow, and it had even inherited a sliver of the Seraphic Dragon physique's characteristics. It really had lived up to all the time and effort he had spent on the Seraphic Dragon physique. You should properly explore this mysterious power. When the time comes, you should be able to unleash an unexpected effect when fighting with your enemies. Tsing Hui nodded. It seems that the ultimate sword Dao does have its merits. What we need to do next is to constantly strengthen our life-bound swords. The stronger the life-bound swords, the stronger the killing power. When my sword intent breaks through again and reaches the level of force, we might be able to break through the ultimate sword Dao's weakness of being easily ambushed and killed by others. Hidden Sword Venerable's eyes were burning with passion. Comprehend force. Force was the embryonic form of the domain. Force and the domain were equivalent to the relationship between the divine beast's divine beast soul and the divine beast battle body. Although force would not have any substantial effect on a cultivator's cultivation, it was the foundation of the domain. Even if Tsing Hui, who had switched to the ultimate sword Dao, no longer needed to construct the domain, as long as sword force was formed, the power of sword force would be like a domain, enveloping his entire body. Even if he did not fully unleash it, he would still be able to monitor all movements within the range of sword force. This would greatly reduce the possibility of being ambushed. And as long as he was not ambushed, with the ultimate sword Dao's fierce attacks, who would he be afraid of? The experiment is almost done. Let's go back. Hidden Sword Venerable said as he glanced at the deep scarlet sword in Xing Hui's hand. The power in your natal legendary sword is still in the golden core state, but the power it unleashes is already comparable to a normal divine ability of an almighty. If this golden core is completed and gives birth to a divine ability, who knows how powerful it will be. A supreme grade golden core has a chance of giving birth to a great divine ability. If you give birth to a great divine ability, you will be invincible in the saint realm. Great divine ability, Xing Hui's eyes flashed. His goal was not as simple as a great divine ability. If he was going to do it, he would do it to the best of his ability. He wanted to form the supreme golden core and give birth to a great divine ability. Once a great divine ability was formed, the cultivator would be invincible in the saint realm. Even the domain of the saints would be torn apart by the great divine ability. For example, Hidden Sword Venerable was like an almighty being who had cultivated a supreme god art. The only difference was that he didn't have the defensive means of those almighty beings who cultivated supreme god arts. Xing Hui and the Hidden Sword Venerable left quickly. Less than half an hour after Xing Hui and the Hidden Sword Venerable left, a figure suddenly appeared and stopped in the void. It was Broken Sword. 3 months ago, the Broken Sword Saint had already rushed from the Heaven Wasteland world to the Hidden Sword mainland. However, as Qing Su had always been with the Hidden Sword Swordmaster, and there was a powerful sword formation in the Burial Sword Peak where the Hidden Sword Swordmaster resided, even though he had borrowed a treasure from the Lihan Holy Man, he was not confident that he could break through the sword formation and suppress the Hidden Sword Swordmaster, who was said to have reached the lawful phenomenon of heaven and earth. One had to know that the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth realm was actually an explosive state where one merged with the heaven and earth and borrowed the power of heaven and earth to pour into one's body. Under this state, other than speed, the cultivator's offensive and defensive methods would all be greatly enhanced. At that time, one could completely throw out mystical abilities as if they were free, and the might of the mystical abilities would rise by an entire level. The only downside was that it would take some time to enter the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. And if there was the defense of the Burial Sword Peak, even if he could use the treasure he borrowed from the Lihan Holy Man, it would be enough for the Hidden Sword Venerable to enter the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth after he destroyed the formation. By then, there would be no other choice but to escape. Furthermore, Xing Hui could still choose to use the Avatar spell or even the teleportation spell to escape. Therefore, when he reached the Hidden Sword mainland, he chose to wait patiently. He waited for the chance when Xing Hui was alone. This wait lasted for 3 months. 3 months later, the Hidden Sword Venerable and Qing Su finally left the sect after so much difficulty, but they just had to erupt with their greatest speed, disappearing like a bolt of lightning. If they pursued him at full speed, he would be able to catch up, but if that happened, it would be impossible for him to hide from Qing Su and the Hidden Sword Venerable. Damn it! But, the huge commotion just now. Was the Hidden Sword Venerable here to test his divine abilities? The Hidden Sword Venerable looked at the 2 sword marks below and his face turned ugly. Especially when he looked at the huge sword mark that was more than 100 kilometers long, his eyes narrowed. This kind of power. Is it possible for an lawful embodiment of heaven and earth cultivator to slash it? Could it be that the Hidden Sword Venerable has broken through to the divine stage? No. Qing Su's potential is startling, and he has received the careful guidance of the Venerable of Hidden Sword, a peak saint, and he has taken him in as a disciple. If he continues to grow, who knows how much he will grow. In particular, the Venerable of Hidden Sword possesses an entire continent. He has accumulated countless resources over the past 1,000 years. If he accumulates all these resources on Qing Su. As he thought of this, the Hidden Sword Venerable could not wait any longer. According to the information that I have collected about the Hidden Sword sect, the Hidden Sword Venerable has a few enemies. Even though these people are not as strong as the Hidden Sword Venerable in a one-on-one fight, and his biggest enemy is the hidden sword venerable who hid in the Black Flame sect in the Barren Lands. If I can gather all of them and use this treasure that I borrowed from the Li Hen holy man, it will be enough to tempt them into taking the risk. The hidden sword venerable did not make this decision earlier because he was worried that these people would discover the secret of Tsing Hui's chaotic stage. However, now, he could not care less. At this moment, he used the Heavenly Ways information channel to contact the hidden sword venerable and his other enemies. Chapter 494. Hidden Sword Sect. Tsing Hui and Hidden Sword Honorable returned to their respective residences after gaining a clear understanding of their powers. Originally, Hidden Sword Honorable had planned to make arrangements for Tsing Hui. However, Tsing Hui decided to return to the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce after considering Hidden Sword Honorable's request and the fact that Hunyuan had become his disciple. The moment Tsing Hui returned to the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce, he was welcomed by the entire Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce. Regardless of whether it was the elders of the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce or those who were not optimistic about the future of the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce, all of them ran up to Tsing Hui without hesitation. Their faces were filled with respect. Tsing Hui did not pay much attention to them. After sending them away, he went with Su Xiao, Su Yuan, and the rest to the courtyard that he had been arranged to stay in. Looking at the courtyard that could only be considered above average compared to the entire Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce, Su Xiao's eyes flashed with embarrassment. She quickly said, "Mr. Yuqing, I will arrange a new residence for you, there's no need. This place is pretty good. I'm used to it." Tsing Hui did not want to fuss over such a small matter. After saying that, he added, "Yuqing is just my alias. My real name is Tsing Hui." With his current cultivation, it was not a big deal for him to reveal his true identity. Perhaps his strength wasn't comprehensive when compared to those almighty figures at the 5th level of the Saint Realm who developed divine abilities. However, with the numerous enhancements provided by his chaotic realm, he would even be able to fight a true almighty figure. Mr. Tsing Hui, Su Xiao and Su Tong were slightly stunned. However, they expressed their understanding. Both parties exchanged greetings in the courtyard for a while. Finally, Su Xiao stepped forward and took out a box that was half the height of a person from her personal space. She handed it to Tsing Hui. "Mr. Tsing Hui, thank you for your help to the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce. This is a token of our gratitude. Please accept it." Tsing Hui glanced at the box. Even though he hadn't opened the box yet, he already knew what was inside the box based on the prompt from the Chaos Temple's interface. It was an object that carried the Tao. Moreover, it contained a total of 241 Taoist rhymes. The Taoist rhyme contained in these Taoist items is 20% more than the remuneration your Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce promised. The extra is a token of appreciation from our Shenhui Chamber of Commerce towards you, Mr. Tsing Hui. Su Xiao said sincerely, "If it wasn't for the fact that our Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce has been suppressed so much over the years and our business is not as good as before, I'm afraid that the Chamber of Commerce would be able to take out twice as many Tao-carrying items. When the time comes, the thank you gift to Mr. Tsing Hui wouldn't be so shabby." "This isn't shabby at all. I'm very satisfied with these gifts," Tsing Hui said with a smile. Then, with a wave of his hand, he stored all the items into his personal space. 241 Taoist rhymes worth of Taoist rhymes was enough for him to raise his chaos level by another 2 levels. When the time came, he could consider improving his comprehension or sword talent to enhance his combat ability. "As long as you're satisfied, Mr. Tsing Hui," Tsing Hui looked at Su Xiao in front of him and thought of his previous plans. "It just so happens that I have a Chamber of Commerce in the Chaos Temple as well. If Miss Su Xiao is interested, why don't we work together?" "The Chaos Temple?" Su Xiao's eyes lit up. To establish a Chamber of Commerce in the Chaos Temple, one must either have an almighty figure with the art of transformation to oversee it, or one must have powerful navigation abilities that allow one to travel between continents. This is the true model of a top chamber of commerce. If the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce can develop to become the #1 chamber of commerce in the Hidden Sword continent, it'll be the pinnacle. If we can work together with the Chamber of Commerce in the Chaos Temple, Mr. Tsing Hui, the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce's future development will definitely usher in unprecedented glory. Tsing Hui nodded. Currently, the Primordial Chaos Chamber of Commerce's business capabilities were too lacking. Although the Hidden Sword continent could not be compared to the Heaven Wasteland world, the overall standard of this continent was by no means weak. At the very least, it was much stronger than the Heavy Truth continent, the Eastern Wasteland, and other continents. Even the Fortune continent that Qin Su had visited before could not be compared to the Hidden Sword continent in front of him. Furthermore, the Hidden Sword sect was the dominant power in the Hidden Sword continent. Furthermore, he had established a good relationship with the Hidden Sword Venerable's ancestor. He believed that with his support, it would not be difficult for the Divine Grace Chamber of Commerce, which was originally a top chamber of commerce, to develop into the #1 chamber of commerce on the continent. When the time came, they would be able to greatly enrich the ordinary business of the Primordial Chaos Chamber of Commerce and expand their influence in the Chaos Temple. Then that's settled. I'll let the management of the Primordial Chaos Chamber of Commerce contact you. Tsing Hui nodded. Finally, his gaze fell on Su Yuan. Su Yuan immediately stood up and respectfully bowed. Master. Yes, you should know that I'm not from the Hidden Sword continent, and I won't be staying on the Hidden Sword continent for long. Even though you're my disciple, I can't control your decision. Next, you have to make your own choice. When I leave the Hidden Sword continent, do you intend to leave with me or stay in the Divine Grace Merchant Group on the Hidden Sword continent? Su Yuan looked a little hesitant. On the other hand, Su Zhao's heart was blessed. Although she was a little reluctant to let her brother leave, it was a great opportunity for Su Yuan to become the disciple of such an important figure like Tsing Hui. This kind of opportunity could not be missed no matter what. Immediately, she hurriedly said, I hope that little brother can cultivate with Mr. Tsing Hui. And at this time, Su Yuan also came back to his senses and said cautiously, I also hope to cultivate with Master. Tsing Hui looked at Su Yuan. Originally, he only nurtured him as a coordinate and integrated a part of his consciousness into his spiritual world to ensure his absolute loyalty. But now, with the incarnation technique, transmission technique, and other abilities, coupled with his relationship with the Hidden Sword Venerable, the Hidden Sword continent was like a backyard to him. It did not have much meaning. It did not matter if Su Yuan followed him or not. Because of this, he asked just now. Now that Su Yuan was willing to leave the Hidden Sword continent with him, he could fulfill his promise to the Hidden Sword Venerable and teach him to become a talent. All right then, you will follow me from now on. Your cultivation has already reached the peak of the true Qi realm. The most important thing for you to do from the true Qi realm to the spirit refining realm is to have a clear understanding of your own martial Tao. On this point, I have strict requirements for you. I need you to comprehend your own sword intent. In a few days, I will ask the Hidden Sword Venerable for a divine sword. At that time, no matter if you eat or sleep, you have to hug the divine sword and not leave it at all. You have to comprehend the spirituality of the divine sword. Ask the Hidden Sword Venerable for a divine sword. Su Xiao and Su Tong's eyes lit up. The Hidden Sword Venerable. If Su Yuan could obtain a divine sword from the Hidden Sword Venerable, his future in the Hidden Sword sect would be limitless. Even if he wanted to compete for the position of the Hidden Sword sect's patriarch, this qualification would be his greatest advantage. Other than eating and living with the divine sword, you have to go to the Wanjian Peak more often and practice your sword skills there. If possible, you can also ask the sword spirits of the Wanjian Peak for guidance. Ask the sword spirits of the Wanjian Peak for guidance. Su Tong was puzzled, can the sword spirits guide us cultivators in the way of the sword? I remember that every time I went to the Myriad Swords Peak, the sword spirits would immediately draw their swords after they reported their sword names. At that time, you could either choose to be killed by the sword spirit or choose to explode with all your cultivation to defeat the sword spirit. Qing Su glanced at the confused Su Tong and said with some understanding, "In my opinion, there's not a single treasure in the entire hidden sword sect that can compare to the Myriad Swords Peak. As a result, make use of the special environment there to cultivate." Su Tong and Su Xiao were still confused, but they knew that Xing Hui would not harm Su Yuan. After all, Su Yuan was able to recover his consciousness because of Xing Hui. They nodded seriously. "Master, I understand. I will go to the Wanjian Peak tomorrow. There is no hurry. Your cultivation is too low now and you can't judge the strength of the sword spirit. Once you meet a strong sword spirit, you will die even if you use all your strength. When you feel that you are connected to the divine sword, you should be able to judge the strength of the sword spirit vaguely. At that time, it will not be too late to go to the Wanjian Peak." "Yes." Xing Hui instructed Su Xiao, Su Tong, Su Yuan and the others to leave. Although he had fused all his cultivation into the deep scarlet sword, he still had to explore the various changes contained in the deep scarlet sword. In particular, the deep scarlet sword's unique ability to confuse people's minds and affect their judgment should be studied carefully. If this ability was used well, it would definitely allow him to achieve twice the result with half the effort when fighting against enemies. Unknowingly, 2 days had passed while he was comprehending the deep scarlet sword. When night fell, Su Yuan, as a disciple, appeared outside Xing Hui's room and asked, "Is Master resting?" "What's the matter?" Su Yuan appeared outside the room. "Master, the peak leader of the Steel Jade Peak wishes to meet you. The other peak leaders were all stopped by us. However, this peak leader of the Steel Jade Peak is a little different. Before he requested to meet you, he presented a gift." After saying that, Su Yuan took out a treasure that looked like a necklace. This necklace was naturally not a rare accessory. The moment Su Yuan took out the necklace, a notification appeared on the Chaos Temple interface. This was an item that contained 8 Taoist rhymes. A meeting gift with 8 Taoist rhymes. This peak master of the Iron Jade Peak is interesting, Qing Su chuckled. For the sake of his gift of 8 Taoist rhymes, there's no harm in meeting him. However, if he has other intentions, it'll depend on his own abilities. If he wants to be like the current sect master of the Hidden Sword sect, then he's got the wrong person. Bring him to the guest hall." "Yes, master." Su Yuan responded and quickly retreated. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.